Chapter 584, Scapegoat. After lowering the copper whistle, Klein had already activated his spirit vision. He saw illusory white bones being weakly thrown up from the ground as they slowly formed a gigantic figure. If the past scenes were like a fountain in a fantasy setting, then this was more like the flow from an ordinary reverse tap. The corners of Klein's mouth moved indiscernibly as he pretended as though he hadn't noticed anything amiss. After a few seconds, the skeleton messenger finally took form. Its nearly 4 meters body tore through the ceiling once again as the pitch-black flames in its eye sockets burned silently. Klein folded the letter he had finished writing and threw it up. He described in detail the tycoon, Jimmy Necker, in the letter. He mentioned the connections between the death chronicles found in the southern continent's Balam Empire's mausoleum, as well as the connection the item had with Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos and Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. He also mentioned how he had successfully sneaked in, and although his assassination had failed, he had left behind something that could be used to determine the location of the Black Death. Of course, he didn't go into detail how he sneaked in. He had only roughly recounted Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's combat techniques and style. After the messenger caught the letter with a swipe that could send an adult human flying, Klein coughed and cleared his throat. "I already have a messenger." The pitch-black flames in the skeleton messenger's sockets clearly flickered before its body collapsed like a waterfall before drilling into the parquet. "You don't have to be afraid of becoming my messenger anymore, right? Am I that detestable to your kind? These messengers from the underworld probably can't bear to leave Mr. Azek. After all, that's a direct descendant of death. There might not even be any skip in the generational line. You want to cozy up with someone powerful. I get it." Klein was just about to pack up and check out when his nose itched suddenly and sneezed. Chew. Chew. Cough. 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 Mucus flowed out as he coughed. His forehead slowly but decisively began burning with heat. "Oh no. Vice Admiral Ailment's ailment is still lingering in my body, and I confronted a 10 degrees Celsius cold wind in order to return to Byam. I really fell ill as a result." Klein used inferior tissue paper to wipe his mucus, contemplating whether to summon himself and act using a spirit body state, so that his physical body could heal by itself. After serious consideration, he believed that it was impossible. Firstly, his physical condition would clearly affect his spirit body's condition. The two were closely related in some magical manner. Secondly, if he ignored it, his physical condition would definitely worsen. "I'm becoming a little dazed from the fever." Klein touched his forehead and prepared to return to the Wind of Azure Inn to meet up with Danitz. Then he had to consider if he should head to a hospital or clinic to buy some medicine. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek finally obtained the Radiant Spirit-packed tree fruit from Mam Hermit, and he successfully concocted the Solar High Priest potion. It was golden in color and had a scorching hot temperature. When Derek drank it, he felt the burning sensation in his throat. His eyes lit up suddenly as they grew brighter, like there were 2 miniature suns hidden in them. His body radiated concentric ripples of pure light as his exposed skin protruded to form black patterns that were visible to the naked eye. At the same time, his body hair grew longer, as though they were changing into feathers that were swirling with golden flames. Derek knew that there would be similar changes when consuming a potion at Sequence 7. He didn't panic or become flustered. He clenched his teeth and repeatedly recalled that pain of him personally killing his parents and the hope that arose from the depths of his heart after meeting Mr. Fool. Despite being on the brink of losing control, he managed to persevere through it. After a while, everything abnormal about him was restored back to normal. However, the air he exhaled was mixed with the warmth of the sun. He felt that his body had become stronger again, and he had some considerable resistance against ailments and treacherous environments. However, that wasn't the main point. Derek liked the various theurgical knowledge that appeared in his mind. They included Fire of Light, Horror Immunity, Holy Oath, Cleave of Purification, Sun Halo, Holy Light Summoning, Holy Water Creation, etc. Derek paced around in delight as he felt that the related theurgical spells he had were very suitable for him in dealing with the evil monsters that hid in the dark. He didn't hide the news and immediately ran to the Twin Towers and recorded the information of his advancement. This way, After a preliminary inspection, he would have the qualifications to helm a small patrolling team as its captain. He could come into contact with more of the City of Silver's information. This includes the method to removing the mental corruption of a Beyonder characteristic, which Mr. World wants. While Derek was answering the registration clerk's various questions, he couldn't help but recall the promise that he hadn't been able to fulfill all this time. Owing something to others often left him uneasy and uncomfortable. And now, he could finally see the light that could restore his calm. In the Amiris Leaf Bar, Worm-Tongue Mither King was holding a cup of red wine. He sat across from the elderly strongman Oziel, crossed his right leg and leisurely asked, "Did you figure out anything specific?" He had been instructed by his captain, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, to return to Byam and investigate the fake Helene. For this, he found Oziel, who had originally issued the mission. He couldn't directly seek out the resistance, because there was a small chance that they were cooperating with the fake Helene. To question them in person was no different from directly bringing his head to the Governor General's office in exchange for the bounty reward. Oziel pulled a chair and sat down. "They didn't hide anything, but I can't be sure if they're speaking the truth or not. As you know, I prefer using fists rather than brains. They said that Helene was brought over by Blazing Danitz. He represented Vice Admiral Iceberg and hoped to establish a cooperative relationship with the resistance. They wanted to provide a certain amount of help, and Helene was a way to express their goodwill." Blazing Danitz? Vice Admiral Iceberg. Mither ruminated over the two names as his expression slowly turned solemn. He leaned back into his chair as he knitted his brows bit by bit. As one of Vice Admiral Hurricane's former captains, he was now the third mate of Vice Admiral Ailment's flagship. He was no stranger to the other pirate admirals, and he knew that Vice Admiral Iceberg was powerful and had a rich collection. With just one ship and a few subordinates, she was able to resist the other pirate admirals. In terms of strength, she was a little stronger than two of his bosses. More pertinently, Vice Admiral Iceberg seldom involved herself in the conflict between pirates. She sought information and explored the unknown to seek out treasure. She was more like an adventurer than a pirate. Why would she suddenly want to assassinate Captain? This doesn't suit her character. She previously suffered a setback because of Admiral of Blood's rumors. She should be focusing on seeking revenge on him. Mither took a sip of red wine as he rubbed his forehead with his other hand. He temporarily stopped thinking about Vice Admiral Iceberg, and he placed his attention on Blazing Danitz. As he carefully recalled, his pupils suddenly shrank. He discovered that there were some recent problems regarding this fourth bosun of the Golden Dream he was familiar with. He laid a trap and killed Steel Mavady, Blood Brambles Hendry, and Calm Squall. His bounty was raised to 4,200 pounds, and in a short period of time, he got embroiled in some matter, causing his bounty to rise again, reaching 5,500 pounds. "This has already exceeded my bounty," Mither thought to himself silently as Blazing Danitz's figure surfaced before him. He found him mysterious and terrifying. He advanced? Or did he receive some great benefits because of something? Mither leaned forward and put down the cup. He whispered seriously, "I originally treated his bounty increase as a joke. But reality has informed me that Blazing Danitz is a great pirate worthy of a 5,500-pound bounty." Mither looked up and said to Strongman Oziel, "Help me seek out intel on Blazing. The recent ones." In the luxurious suite in the Wind of Azure Inn. When Danitz opened the door and saw Gehrman Sparrow, he glanced around warily before making way. "How was it? Did the hunt succeed?" he asked in excitement and curiosity after closing the door. "Vice Admiral Ailment is a famous beauty. Back when I saw her, she was even more charming than I imagined. What a pity if she were to just die like that. She should be locked up forever without parole. Pooey! How can she be prettier than Captain? Those with looks like her are plenty in the Red Theater." Contradictory thoughts ran through Danitz's head. Klein clenched his fist and placed it to his mouth before coughing violently. After calming down, he answered coldly, "Almost." "What a pity," Danitz sighed. But deep down, he was thinking, this madman, Gehrman Sparrow, is really strong. He infiltrated the Black Death to assassinate Vice Admiral Ailment but was only just fell short of success. Even though he failed, he successfully returned almost without any injuries. One had to know that the reason why every pirate admiral was famous throughout the 5 seas, being second only to the 4 kings, wasn't only because they themselves were strong, it was also because they represented a crew, a force to be reckoned with. They had many Beyonders under them. To be able to escape from the Black Death after a failed assassination had indicated that Gehrman Sparrow was in no way weaker than any pirate admiral. Is creeping hunger really that powerful? No, even if I were in his shoes and had creeping hunger, I wouldn't be able to go that far. Danitz was increasingly convinced that his choice of not resisting during his first encounter with Gehrman Sparrow was extremely wise. Klein coughed twice again and prepared to instruct Danitz to buy some medicine for him from the hospital. He then recalled that the cause of his illness was complicated. The medicine provided to him without a doctor's careful examination might not be effective. Even the many medicines that Emperor Roselle had previously invented were the same. If it wasn't because it's impossible to use the gray fog to establish a remote treating system, I really wish that I could consult Emlyn White to make me some medicine. Klein went to the washroom to wash up and change into his original clothes and burn the clothes he obtained from the fisherman. Upon seeing him come out, Danitz went over with a paper bag and said in a sycophantic manner, "This is the 700 pounds they gave." At this point, he and Klein heard someone knock on the door. It was Captain Eland. When the captain rushed into the room, he gave Gehrman Sparrow a deep look and suppressed his voice. "I planned on returning to Pritz Harbor, but I received a piece of intel. Something huge seemed to have happened at Bansi Harbor." Chapter 585. Buying medicine. The Church of Storms has finally taken action on Bansi Harbor? Klein clenched his fist and placed it to his mouth before coughing. He asked calmly without any qualms, "What happened?" Eland didn't notice any abnormal reaction from Gehrman Sparrow. He retracted his gaze and surveyed the area. "I don't know what exactly happened. I only know that it might have involved the upper echelons of the Church of Storms. And for a period of time before that, all routes that lead to Bansi Harbor were cancelled. This might have been a so-called omen." Involved the upper echelons of the Church of Storms? No, it should be the most elite forces. I suspect that the pontiff of the Church of Storms, that grounded angel, had personally taken action. He might have even used a Grade 0 sealed artifact. After all, he might be facing a king of angels, one that's even older than the 4th epoch, as well as his descendants. Klein nodded and calmly asked, "What's the outcome?" He wasn't the least bit surprised that the Church of Storms had only taken action on Bansi Harbor in the past few days. Even though the mandated punishers were known for being rash and irascible, there was still a protocol that needed to be followed for serious matters like this. For example, they needed to make a confirmation, evacuate a portion of innocent residents, or seal off the surrounding sea. All of this needed time. Eland was unable to read Gehrman Sparrow's true emotions as he sighed with a smile. There won't be a Bansi Harbor for a very long period of time. As expected of the Church of Storms, Klein secretly clicked his tongue, feeling even more curious about the detailed process. He wanted to know whether Red Angel Medici had appeared, and if he really was sleeping near Bansi Harbor. He wanted to know if he had been wiped out by the Church of Storms and wished to know what happened to the natives in Bansi Harbor. He wanted to know what it meant for them to speak in such a staccato manner, and he wished to know what secrets were hidden in the Green Lemon restaurant and the telegraph office. Unfortunately, with Bansi Harbor's destruction, it was difficult for him to obtain any actual answers. Perhaps the internal record of the Church of Storms would mention them, but Klein had no way of getting them. With the Hanged Man's rank, there was no way he could gain access to such confidential information. "I'll have to nurture Mr. Hanged Man into a high-sequence demigod before I can know the answers to my questions." Klein sighed silently and said without a change in expression, "That place is indeed very dangerous." Before he finished his sentence, his throat itched as he coughed violently. "You fell ill?" Eland asked, puzzled. He originally imagined that Gehrman Sparrow was like him, a Beyonder whose physique had been considerably enhanced. It was unlikely for Beyonders like them to fall ill before they grew weak from age. But from the looks of it, his previous guess might have been wrong. Klein answered tersely without giving an explanation. a question of no value or meaning. It would be odd if he isn't ill after an intense battle with ailment maiden. Danitz grumbled in contempt from the side. Alan chuckled and said, I can recommend you an apothecary that's better than a hospital or clinic. That's his beyonder job. He has a tiny herb store in the alley diagonally across Red Theater. He's known for selling male enhancements, but that's not what he's best at. Does every apothecary develop such medicine? That's right. It's absolutely one of the most profitable medicine-based businesses. It's only odd not to do it if they're capable of doing it. Klein nodded slightly in response. Why haven't I heard of him? Danitz asked, surprised. He only came to Byam in the past few months. When was your last visit here in the City of Generosity? Eland asked with a chuckle. When I took your crappy boat. Danitz answered silently in his mind. He carefully recalled and discovered that in the past few months, apart from this period of time, he had passed by Byam once during the early days of his vacation. At other times, he was drifting out at sea in search of treasure. Otherwise, he was at other places or harbors enjoying himself, so it was true that he wasn't aware of any minor changes in the City of Generosity. I've already spent quite a few days in Byam. I've been to the Red Theater several times, but I've not heard anything about this apothecary. This can only serve to imply that his male enhancement medicines are limited in effect. Danitz bragged as he said stubbornly. Elan smiled and didn't debate with the great pirate. Instead, he said to Gehrman Sparrow, if it's only an ordinary ailment, the apothecary will only charge a slight premium. And for you, it doesn't matter if it's expensive. What's most important is to recover your health as quickly as possible. No adventurer wishes to stay in a sick state. This implies danger and that you might become the target of someone else. It implies the increased risk of losing control. Indeed, maintaining a good state is a rather important matter for beyonders. However, the price is still very important, all right? If that apothecary were to charge £1,000, then I might as well buy medicine from the hospital. Or I can describe the situation of my illness and get that vampire, Emlyn White, to make me some medicine. Although I already have £6,000 in savings and have several beyonder characteristics, I still need to consider it. I still want to add a mystical item with lethal offensive power and seek out clues to the high-sequence potion formula. Klein mumbled inwardly. High-sequence potion formulas were impossible to put a price on in this mysterious world. Therefore, Klein only thought of buying the relevant clues. After Eland left, Klein took the £700 and gave Danitz £200. Wearing his hat and holding his cane, he coughed and wiped his snot before stepping out the door in preparation to take a carriage to the vicinity of the Red Theater. Danitz was very curious about the apothecary's medicine. He pasted 2 mustaches on his face, wore a cap, and followed. With Klein's guidance, he already knew that using a scarf to hide his face was an act that strongly attracted attention in Byam. He took his advice to buy some fake mustaches. In the alley diagonally across the Red Theater, the moment Klein entered, he saw a man furtively come out of a nameless herb store. The moment the man saw someone, he hurriedly lowered his head and rushed off. Don't worry. We won't be guessing what medicine you're buying. Klein coughed twice again, increased his pace, and walked into the dark herb store. He scanned the area and was surprised because the boss was someone he knew. The boss was wearing a black robe that resembled a village witch doctor. He was in his 30s with black hair and brown eyes. His face was round and his body chubby. He was none other than the chubby apothecary who often liked to use sarcasm at the gathering held by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom in Backland. Klein had once recognized him at a circus. He stopped showing up at old Mr. Eye of Wisdom's Beyonder gathering because he left Backland. Klein coughed and took 2 steps forward. Make some medicine for me. On the chubby apothecary's shoulder stood a round-eyed owl. The man and the bird looked up at the same time at Klein. After a brief examination, the chubby apothecary revealed a warm smile. Friend, it's cold outside. Don't do those deeds out in the open, although it's true that it can be rather exciting. What the hell? Klein was first stumped before he understood what he was getting at. When batting Tracy, I was influenced by her pleasure powers. Blood flowed down to my nether regions, and my desires undulated. This resulted in my body emptying out, making it faster and easier for the ailment to strike me. When escaping, the ice-cold sea was fine since I had theurgical spells protecting me. But the wind on the way back was rather cold. It worsened my sickness. In conclusion, doesn't this look like getting sick as a result of having pleasure out in the open? As expected of our apothecary, he has sharp eyes. Klein maintained a composed expression and just looked at him without answering him. All he did was wait for him to concoct the medicine. Danitz turned his head to look out the herb store as he held back his laughter with great difficulty. What dog's hit apothecary is this? He can't even distinguish the ailments released by Ailment Maiden. He thought in glee. When the chubby apothecary didn't get a response, he dully opened some cabinets, took out some common or strange herbs and insect carapaces, stuffed them into a paper bag and handed it over. Put it all in water and cook it for half an hour. Drink the liquid that's left over. For solely. It's a little expensive. Klein glanced at Danitz. The latter immediately took out the money automatically. As the chubby apothecary collected the money, he bent his back and suppressed his voice to say with a chuckle, I have medicine that can make you stand out in that area. The kind that has mummy powder added. Need it? I guarantee you that you'll be satisfied. I know you might be very strong, but men always seek to be stronger. Firstly, I need to have a girlfriend. Klein coldly shook his head and rejected the chubby apothecary's recommendation. The chubby apothecary straightened his back in disappointment. He turned his gaze and sized up the two before asking, Are the both of you adventurers? Yes, Klein answered simply. The chubby apothecary rubbed his hands and said, I have a request, but you'll only be paid after completing it. How big is the reward? Klein pinched his nose. 100 pounds, the chubby apothecary shouted as his heart pained for the money. Help me find someone. His name is Roy King. He's my teacher. He got me to meet him here, but I haven't seen him after waiting for months. And I have no way of contacting him. Is there a portrait or a photograph? Klein inquired. The chubby apothecary took out a photograph from a secret pouch by his waist and handed it over. It was of a relatively young man. His hair was neatly combed back and he wore glasses. He appeared very gentlemanly. Your teacher? Klein asked. I might believe it if you're the teacher. The chubby apothecary coughed dryly and said, He's at least 60, but he looks young. A beyonder power or a mystical item? Klein nodded in thought and began asking about the specifics. After confirming that there weren't any items he could use to divine, he took the paper bag and left the store. After he disappeared from the alley, the owl standing on the chubby apothecary's shoulder suddenly said, Darkwill, that guy might know you. Chapter 586. Farewell and goodbye. What? He knows me? The chubby apothecary, Darkwill, was alarmed as he whispered back. The owl's round eyes looked ahead and said, I noticed that he clearly paused for 2 seconds the moment he saw you when he came in. Perhaps he thinks someone like me doesn't match his image of an apothecary? The chubby apothecary retorted. The owl spread its wings and landed. Suit yourself if you wish to think so. What books have you been reading recently? The fat on the chubby apothecary's face trembled. The owl replied sternly and seriously, My reading is based on your knowledge standards such as those involving soccer. Unfortunately, the words you grasp and can teach me are limited. I have no choice but to read popular novels that have a lower requirement on one's vocabulary. Besides, they're all serialized on the newspaper. Darkwill chuckled. I'll buy a recipe cookbook later. It's called Guide to East Balham Bird Culinary Methods. Without waiting for the owl to answer, his expression sank and he muttered to himself, He knows me? He looks like the standard Loanese man. More than half his blood is at least Lone. I used a fake name to stay in a few cities in Lone. It's not odd to be recognized by him. But I still need to be on guard. If I don't receive any news about Old Man before March, then I have to leave this place. Having said that, he turned his head to look at the owl who was perched on his shoulder. At times, you're still rather useful. No, your eyes and your body language tells me that your real thoughts are, darn it. I wanted to buy a pet that can help me beat monsters and gangsters. I sought out beyond ingredients of a potion recipe according to the standards of a dragon, but I ended up getting a silly bird who only knows how to read newspapers and plays. Darn it. I want to stuff another potion down its throat. The owl repeated like a parrot by mimicking the chubby apothecary's tone. Darkwill's expression stiffened for a few seconds before he chuckled. It's good that you know this, silly bird. If I didn't have the powers of a beast tamer, you wouldn't have even managed a single potion. Inside the herb store, the man and bird fell into silence. After a while, the owl pretended as though nothing had happened as it asked, Darkwill, is it really going to work? You've already entrusted this to dozens of adventurers. I'm not good at finding people, so I can only entrust it to someone else. Besides, they have to find and confirm Old Man's location before I make a payment. I don't even need to spend a single penny. The chubby apothecary sked as he said before he sighed. Old Man always calls himself a lucky person and a winner of fate. He should be fine. Will the medicine brewed from this really be effective? While returning to the Wind of Azure in via carriage, Danitz looked at the paper bag beside Klein. The things inside were black herbs, strangely shaped insect carapaces, and weirdly colored flowers. It didn't seem like anything reliable. Klein nodded. Yes. You haven't drunk it? Danitz subconsciously retorted. I trust him. Although his mouth stinks and is rather vile, he has a rather kind heart. Besides, Captain Elland believes that his medicine is sufficiently effective. As Gehrman Sparrow, Klein didn't respond to Danitz's doubts. He directly picked up the paper bag and threw it over. Without needing any spoken words, Danitz knew what he meant. He was in charge of brewing the medicine. Furthermore, he was accustomed to doing similar matters recently, so he didn't have any urges to resist. After returning to the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein got a chair to sit in while he watched Danitz light up the fireplace and prop up a pot. He then added water and the herbs into it. Leaning back, Klein felt his head feel groggy. He was very exhausted and felt like he could fall asleep at any moment. In order to wait for the medicine to finish brewing and for him to quickly resolve his illness, he forced himself to consider various problems to combat the fatigue. On careful consideration, during the battle with Vice Admiral Ailment, if I hadn't succeeded in sneaking in an attack on her and suppressing her from the very beginning, preventing her from getting into her rhythm until she eventually found a chance to force open a gap between us by turning invisible, then I might have not been her match. The two powers of invisibility and ailments are really like a bug in a game. Matched with an assassin's lethal strike and the interference of pleasure, it really makes one unable to find and hit her or escape. One can only watch their body gradually weaken and become inflicted with all sorts of ailments. One can even get mesmerized and give up resisting. On the one hand, it's because every sequence 5 is very powerful, as expected of the sequence just before a demigod. On the other hand, it's because Creeping Hunger's various powers aren't a good match. It cannot be considered to be multifaceted without any weaknesses. The powers of a Sequence 5 Nimblewright Master of the Seer Pathway is highly effective against invisibility. I can try to help the chubby apothecary find his teacher in the meantime, but without any information with just a picture, I can only try my luck. I'll have to see when I can directly find a clue. After all, I'm not a god, and I can't find people remotely. Wait, in a certain way, I am a god. I can get sea god believers to help find him. As long as that old gentleman named Roy King once visited Byam, he would have definitely encountered others and be seen by them. Most native residents secretly believe in sea god. This is what it means by a sea of people. Also, before Captain Elland leaves Byam, I should get him to introduce me to a point of contact for the military. In the future, I can get him to reimburse me for any intel. They can also check if there were any travelers named Roy King who registered on any liners in recent months. There's another method. I've placed the radio transceiver above the gray fog for some time. I should be able to contact the magic mirror, a Rhodes, if I take it down. I was originally planning on asking for Helene's location, but I no longer need to find the red-haired lady anymore. I can switch to Roy King. For a matter which many adventurers have no clue on how to begin, I have 3 solutions. Amidst his thoughts, Klein finally held on until the medicine was successfully brewed. Looking at the bottle of blackish-green liquid that Danitz brought over, he hesitated for 2 seconds before extending his hand to receive it and placed it to his mouth. Gulp. Klein immediately felt his throat burn as his face flushed red. This made him recall his attempt at eating crazy spicy food in his previous life. Suddenly, his entire person awakened as his stuffy nose quickly cleared. Gulp. Gulp. He barely finished drinking it and felt as though he had nearly recovered from his sickness. By nighttime, he had fully recovered. He no longer showed any doubt towards an apothecary's abilities. No wonder the potion's name is Apothecary. Klein wore his hat and left the inn with Danitz. Under the cloak of night, they left Byam and came to a secret harbor hidden on the other end of the jungle. Tonight, the Golden Dream was providing aid to the resistance. After some coordination and hassle, Danitz used the Soulfall ritual to contact Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina. After some time, the ship, that was often scrubbed clean and had a strange main cannon, docked by the private harbor. Its gigantic sails drew 5 types of gold coins. They were the gold pound of Lone, the gold horn of Fasak, the Vril gold of Intis, the gold rizet of Fainapotter, and the Sasson gold of Lenberg. This was the flag of the Golden Dream. It was also the symbol of this pirate crew. It's still not professional enough. If it were me, I would add Porter gold from Mason, Zloty from Seeger, Motif gold coins from Balam Empire, etc. Klein stood by the side with his hands in his pocket as he watched Edwina Edwards appear at the bow. At that moment, she was wearing a hunter's hat, a rider's shirt, and a black coat. She matched the image of a female pirate admiral in the minds of the resistance. She often dresses like she's a private tutor. Klein mumbled and took a few steps back, allowing Danitz to run around and busy himself. This pirate worth 5,500 pounds did the liaison, sending a batch of food and fabric to Kalat and the resistance before the transaction came to a close. Danitz secretly inhaled and came to Klein's side and forced a smile. There's nothing else, right? I can now return to the Golden Dream, right? Also, how do you plan on settling the hiring fee? That's only an excuse your captain and I used. In a particular sense, this batch of food and fabric is my payment. Klein nodded. Your captain has already paid. You can return. For real? Danitz found it unbelievable. Although Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina wasn't far behind him, he was still afraid that Gehrman Sparrow would suddenly have a crazy fit. Klein didn't reply and turned around, walking straight towards the path that led out of the private harbor. Danitz exhaled silently and held back his excited feelings before briskly running back to the Golden Dream. Only when the Golden Dream steered far away into the night, with the private harbor that belonged to the resistance slowly shrinking in size, did he really believe that he was back on the Golden Dream. At that instant, he felt that he had experienced just too many things over the past half a month or so. It was an unprecedented level of exhilaration, as though it was an interesting dream. At this moment, a sailor came close and asked out of curiosity, "Boss, was Steele Mavady really killed by you?" Danitz immediately laughed out loud and secretly stole a glance at Captain Edwina before saying to his subordinate, "I contributed greatly to this deed. Let's talk over drinks." Above the dark sea, the Golden Dream drifted off into the distance. After returning to the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein was just about to sleep when he saw the surrounding colors turn abnormally bright. The white bedsheets turned whiter, and the brown floorboards turned more brownish yellow. The dark red curtains appeared like fresh blood. In the scene with all sorts of colors stacked upon each other, Isaac Eggers suddenly walked out from a rippling aqueous void. He was dressed in his usual shirt, bow tie, tailcoat, and a top hat. His skin was bronze in color, and he had soft facial features. How enviable! I also wish to have such powers of traveling through the spirit world. Klein silently sighed as he smiled in greeting while maintaining his appearance. Good evening, Mr. Isaac. Isaac took off his top hat and looked at the rather unfamiliar face. Without finding it strange, he chuckled. Apologies. I came in a hurry. I should have knocked on the door. What's the exact situation with those death chronicles? Klein invited him to have a seat. He then described in detail things he couldn't explain in the letter. Towards the end, he mentioned in passing about the matter regarding Bansi Harbor, saying how it involved King of Angels Medici and his descendants. Azik leaned back into the chair and said with a frown, "There's such a name in my memories. He should have the two titles of Red Angel and War Angel. However, he had perished long ago." "Perished long ago?" Klein asked in surprise. Azik nodded and thought over it. "I remember that he was killed by Blood Emperor Alista Tudor." Killed by Blood Emperor Alista Tudor? Klein's pupils shrank as he recalled the evil spirit that loitered in the underground ruins beneath Backlund. It had claimed to be an innocent killed by the Blood Emperor. Chapter 587. Confusing could it be that evil spirit is Red Angel Medici, the King of Angels who once served that creator and was one of the founders of Rose Redemption? Klein instantly generated such a thought and began utilizing backward inference to seek out any traces or clues. The former holder of the Red Priest card was attracted to the underground palace because of a certain level of attraction and had died beside the Tudor descendants. The evil spirit I saw in my dream could easily kill a powerful dragon back when it was alive. It knows the potion formula of the Mutant Pathways Sequence 4 and even more. It's very aware of matters regarding Rose Redemption. The Orthodox churches that have existed ever since the Cataclysm don't know that the former Binzi and that the present Bansi has a descendant of the Medici family residing there, but the evil spirit was able to provide the corresponding information. There's a very high chance of deriving this from the death of Red Angel Medici. And this King of Angels was actually killed by Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. Does this mean that the latter had already exceeded Sequence 1 and had reached the rank of true god as a Sequence 0 and could no longer be witnessed directly? That evil spirit said so itself that in the late stages of the Fourth Epoch, Solomon Empire's Dark Emperor, Tudor Empire's Blood Emperor, and Trunsoist Empire's Night Emperor were fighting for the position of Sequence 0 until Alista Tudor went crazy. Does this mean that from that point onwards, Blood Emperor was a half-crazy true god? Right, Mr. Azik mentioned in the letter that he lost his senses from merely being glanced at by Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. Back then, he was at least a Sequence 4 demigod. To have such might, it can only be explained that Blood Emperor was at the true god level. Mr. Azik also described the revival of the true Dark Emperor in his letter. He described him as sitting on a gigantic throne as he overlooked the land. For the Dark Emperor to revive and return, there is a high chance that he was a true god at the Sequence 0 rank. If that were the case, the War of the Four Emperors was of a higher order than I previously imagined. It's no longer a battle of three Sequence 1s fighting for the position of Sequence 0. Klein connected all the dots from the past, gaining a brand new understanding of Fourth Epoch history. But as a result, many questions arose. If that ancient evil spirit really is King of Angels Medici, then the underground palace might very well belong to Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. Then why would there be two thrones of equal standing? Why would there be 6 humanoid statues of the true gods? Why would the half-crazy Blood Emperor kill Red Angel Medici? After he became Sequence 0, which spot did he occupy? Firstly, Dark Emperor can be eliminated. It can't be Red Priest, right? Red Angel Medici was killed for its Beyonder characteristic. But Red Priest and Dark Emperor do not seem like neighboring pathways that allow exchanging. I can basically confirm that the former is paired with the Demoness pathway. Captain mentioned before that consuming the potions of other pathways might not mean death, but there's a high probability of going mad and obtaining warped but terrifying powers. This matches Blood Emperor's half-crazy trait. In his final step, as there was no hope for Dark Emperor and any neighboring pathways, he took the craziest choice and switched to another pathway that's completely unrelated, becoming half-crazy as the price? But the same problem arises. Advancing to Red Priest requires King of Angels Medici to be killed, but before advancing, Alista Tudor wouldn't have been able to complete it by himself. Unless he had more Sequence 1s helping him or other Sequence 0 true gods. Upon realizing this, the statues in the underground palace suddenly flashed past Klein's mind. The Evernight goddess statue who used the moon as a pillow, the Earth Mother statue that hugged a baby in her bosom, the Lord of Storms statue that had lightning flashing behind him, the handsome eternal blazing sun statue, the tall and royal god of combat statue, and the god of knowledge and wisdom statue who wore a hood all cast ice-cold gazes at him from the darkness. At that instant, Klein couldn't help but tremble. However, he remembered that the six gods supported the Trunsoist Empire, not the Tudor Empire. The history of the fourth epic becomes more harrowing and confusing the more you delve into it. Klein sighed secretly. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac Eggers noticed his pause. Klein said in passing, "I was only thinking that since Red Angel Medici had long perished at the hands of Alista Tudor, then who is the god of weather who has a following in Banksy Harbor during the recent centuries? And what's the reason for their odd behavior?" With this in mind, Klein came to a pause. This was because the matter regarding Banksy Harbor was unlike what he imagined. He originally believed that Red Angel Medici was asleep there, but to his surprise, he had long perished. In that case, the secrets underlying the Green Lemon restaurant and the telegraph office became even more indecipherable. He had no way of deducing anything without any further information. The more he thought about it, the more horrified he became. Could that evil spirit have expected such an outcome when he indicated Binsey Town? That might have been a required step for him, to escape the seal? Should I tell this matter to Mr. Isaac and gain his opinion? Yes, I'll let Miss Magician, who's in Backland, to monitor the area and see if there's any abnormalities. If there's none, it can wait till I return to Backland and contact Miss Sharon. After seeking her opinion, I can inform Mr. Isaac. After all, it's a ruin we explored together. I have to respect her opinion. If there are any abnormalities, then the matter can only be expedited due to the seriousness of the issue. Klein quickly made a decision. When Isaac heard his question, he laughed. "Don't think about such matters. They've definitely been buried by the Church of Storms. To forcibly seek out the reasons will only bring about extreme danger. Even at the level of an angel, there's still a chance of perishing. In the mysterious world, curiosity is often the leading cause of death." Klein recalled the matters he had experienced and heard of in the past. He switched to saying, "Mr. Isaac, I already have a messenger that I can call my own." "Much faster than I imagined," Isaac said with a smile. Klein simply explained how he changed the incantation and how he completed the summoning and ended up encountering an oddity in the spirit world. When summoning spirit world creatures, there's indeed a chance of such things happening when it's not done by someone of the corresponding job. It requires repeated trial and error before obtaining the desired result. But repeated attempts make it easy to encounter danger. Even if you add descriptions like friendly, it isn't absolutely safe. The spirit world creature which is summoned might not have any malicious intent towards you and wouldn't wish to harm you, but it doesn't mean that its very existence won't hurt you. Perhaps just the aura it has can reduce you to a pile of blood. After Isaac heard about the creature whose speed surpassed imagination, the being who was easily neglected, and the creature with extremely high survivability, he laughed and warned him. After that he asked, "How did you succeed in the end?" Klein said in embarrassment, "I changed the final sentence to a unique being that is willing to be my messenger." Isaac was taken aback for a second as he curiously looked at Klein. "This description is too generic. Typically, it wouldn't succeed." "Perhaps I was rather lucky." Klein cautiously described his messenger's appearance and even hid the matter of her request for a gold coin. Isaac thought over it carefully and said, "I do not have an impression of this spirit world creature, but since you've already signed a contract and have had it witnessed by the underworld, she likely wouldn't cause you any harm. However, before you fully understand her, try not to get her to do anything apart from sending letters." "All right." Klein originally wanted to say that he had nothing he needed her for other than sending letters when he recalled his battle with Mr. A. The room fell into a brief moment of silence before Klein pulled the conversation back on track. "Mr. Isaac, when can we head for the Black Death?" The longer the delay, the higher the chances of whatever he left on the Black Death to be cleaned up during the daily cleaning jobs. "Now." Isaac stood up and put on his hat. Klein was dressed properly, and just as he was trying to find an excuse to head to the washroom to divine if there would be any danger taking action tonight, Isaac grabbed his shoulder and pulled him into the spirit world. Amidst the stacked colors and nearly formless figures, he heard Mr. Azek say, "Let's begin." That direct? Don't you need to confirm things? Perhaps a big shot has his own way of determining the level of danger. Klein silently mumbled and held up his cane and began divining the location of the items he left behind. The cane flew automatically as it tumbled ahead. Azek followed closely behind with Klein in tow as they smoothly passed through the spirit world. Before long, the black hardwood cane paused with thick black and stacked shadows ahead of it. Through this abstract scene, Klein could vaguely identify it as something resembling the Black Death. At this moment, Azek's body came to a pause as he solemnly said, "The spirits here tell me that there is danger." There is danger? Something that can make even Mr. Azek find it dangerous? Vice Admiral Ailment got help? A high-ranking member of the Demonist sect? Klein frowned suddenly. He fully believed the judgment of the big shot, since Sequence 7 of the Death Pathway was spirit medium. After advancing to the realm of demigod, being able to notice this was considered very normal. Azek half-closed his eyes for 2 seconds before opening them. But the problem isn't serious. Let's enter. Problem isn't serious? That's probably the case when it's directed at you. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he decided to change his looks. This way, even if he was no match and had to flee pathetically, he didn't have to be afraid of someone coming to knock on his door. In an instant, Klein possessed a distinctive broad chin and cold blackish-green eyes. His hair turned brown and was tied into a bun at the back of his head like an ancient warrior. He had disguised himself as the former owner of Creeping Hunger, Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. Azek gave him a glance as the surroundings suddenly seemed to plummet as all sorts of bright colors flew by. In a blink of an eye, Klein found himself in Ailment Maiden Tracy's captain's cabin again. This gallant and brilliant female pirate was wearing a different white shirt. On her left shoulder was a clear bandage while her black hair was coiled up instead of cascading down amorously. Faced with this sudden visitor, she didn't show any panic but smiled. At this moment, a gentle female's voice from a difficult-to-identify location sounded. "It's you?" Chapter 588, Old Acquaintance, It's You? Upon hearing this surprised and curious female voice, Klein jumped in fright, imagining that he had been recognized by someone. He immediately composed himself because he had already changed his appearance to that of the deceased Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. And inside Kalangos was the crazy adventurer, Gairman Sherlock. And inside Gairman Sparrow was the identity of the great detective, Sherlock Moriarty. And inside Sherlock Moriarty was the identity of Klein Moretti. This wasn't the end. Deep within Klein Moretti was Mr. Fool, Zhou Mingrui. There's no reason that she can directly see my true essence. Besides, how can she know of a trivial character like Klein Moretti? Even Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos wouldn't have left the Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's helper surprised. To be specially invited by a Sequence 5 pirate admiral to protect herself and deal with her enemy, the person must be at least a Sequence 4 demigod. Therefore, that sentence was directed at Mr. Azek? That high-ranking demoness recognizes Mr. Azek, who had destroyed their cooperation with the royal family and in Zangwil in Backland, or does she recognizes him from one of his former lives? Klein quickly cleared his train of thoughts and remained guarded against Tracy and her helper's sudden attacks. He also looked through the corner of his eye to observe Mr. Azek's reaction. He wasn't too surprised that a mysterious powerhouse would appear. Firstly, this was because Mr. Azek had already given a warning, and secondly, it was because he believed that Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy wasn't a self-conceited person. To almost be assassinated without knowing the assassin's backing faction and motive, there was a high probability that she would leave the sea around the Rorstad archipelago to seek help from the upper echelons of the Demonist sect. The only thing hadn't expected was that her helper would arrive so quickly. It was as though she was nearby or had a mystical item like that of a traveler. Combining the female characteristics of the voice and the gentleness within it, Klein suspected that it was a demoness at the demigod level. Azek stood on the thick carpet and said after 2 seconds of hesitation, "You know me?" This tone sounds uncertain. Could it be that my big shot had once spent a period of time with a demoness? No, I can't think of it that way. Klein began to imagine things before he seriously felt penitent for having those thoughts. He noticed that Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy wore an aghast look. Her certainty and calm had turned into puzzlement. The gentle female voice sounded out from an unknown location again. "I obviously know you. You should also know me." Azik turned his ears to the side to listen before he shook his head and gave a rueful smile. "I'm sorry. I've repeatedly lost my memories and am in the midst of recovering them. If you can remind me and invoke more of my memories, I'll be very grateful to you." Upon hearing their conversation, Tracy's puzzled and confused look settled. She cautiously swept her gaze at Klein but frowned when she saw Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos's face. The gentle female voice sighed. "The last time we met was 1,300 years ago. Back then, Primordial and Death were working together, instigating the Pale Disaster in the northern continent. You might have already forgotten that we once fought the saints and angels of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I know this piece of history. It was recorded in Emperor Roselle's diary. Mr. Dorr said that it resulted in the primordial demoness being heavily injured, and she had only managed to descend only in recent times. As for Death, he directly perished and created the Berserk Sea that separated the northern and southern continents. The Demoness sect and the forces of Death had previously cooperated, so it's no wonder that a demigod-ranked Demoness knows Mr. Azik. Man, she's also a monster that has lived for at least 1,400 years. Klein thought with a creative mind. Following that, he felt puzzled again. He originally imagined that Mr. Azik had suffered heavy injuries from being glanced at Blood Emperor Alistair during the War of the Four Emperors, which resulted in him constantly losing his memory and forgetting his past. However, what the demigod-ranked Demoness indicated was that not only did Azik survive the War of the Four Emperors, but he had even participated in the Pale Disaster many years later. He didn't seem to have any problems in between. Azik closed his eyes as though he was trying to squeeze out his memories. After a few seconds, he asked hesitantly, "Katarina Pell? You are already a Demoness of Unaging? I'm very happy that you can still remember me. I could only be considered a weakling compared to you back then." A figure outlined itself beside Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. She wore a simple and pure white gown which had high slits that revealed her flawless legs. Her skin was as white as snow and as tender as a young maiden's. The woman had black hair and blue eyes, and she looked elegant and pretty. She had an indescribable charm. She looked towards Azik Eggers as a faint smile curled at the corner of her lips. "More than 1,000 years have passed. It's a cause for celebration for us to meet, alive." Balam Empire's Mr. Death Consul. Mr. Azik was Balam Empire's Death Consul. This is the name of a later potion in the Death Pathway? This Demoness of Unaging Katarina Pell looks like she's in her 30s. She's elegant and pure, yet she exudes a mature charm. Wait, why am I thinking of this? Her pleasure charms are already that potent? Katarina hurriedly moved his gaze away and nearly had to use cogitation to calm his emotions. Without waiting for Azik to say a word, Katarina Pell said with a melodic voice, "I'm curious over why you would still be constantly losing your memories. I remember that it only happens for your pathway during the undying stage. Dying once every 60 years to revive again and forget the past. However, you have long advanced past that and escaped from that curse. What happened to you at the end of the Pale Disaster?" Heh, the 7 gods had fractured back then and treated each other as enemies. We both believed that Primordial and Death would succeed, but who knew that the proudest son and the most arrogant tyrant would bow their heads? They quickly joined forces again. If I hadn't managed to advance by chance, then I might have already perished at the end of that divine battle. I believe you should have suffered some damage which resulted in your present state. Death's perishing is itself the greatest injury for you. Azik fell silent as he wore an indistinct, painful expression. I can't remember. At this moment, Klein realized that Katarina Pell looked somewhat familiar, and he suspected her of being the white-robed lady who had led Madame Sharon onto the path of a Demoness. Suddenly, Katarina's eyes turned to sweep a glance at Klein. She chuckled at Azik and said, "I believe you haven't forgotten the reason for visiting today? I'm very curious why he would assassinate Tracy." Could it be for justice? The glance the demoness of unaging swept over was filled with hidden amorousness and sweet playfulness. She resembled an underage young maiden, and her facial features and bearing had magically accentuated that feeling. She didn't have the jarring feeling of a mature lady acting young at all. At that moment, Klein viewed her as a maiden who was 16 or 17. She can already perfectly present every charm a woman can bring. She has the skin, facial features, and bearing to match it. As expected of a demoness of unaging, Klein had already attempted to use cogitation to resist this indescribable charm. He took the initiative to look at ailment maiden Tracy. "Do you know the tycoon named Jimmy Necker?" Tracy gaped her mouth before closing it again. She replied blankly and aggrieved, "Who is he?" "You might not know him. He once collected a batch of ancient chronicles related to death. He died at the hands of Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos," Klein said while bearing the appearance of Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. Tracy narrowed her eyes. She wore a dazed look before turning angry. "You came for those documents? It really is in your hands?" Klein determined based on her tone. He answered indifferently, "That's right." Tracy inhaled slightly and said, "Where's Helene? Did you do anything to her? I know she's still alive. If something happens to her, my spiritual intuition will tell me." Klein didn't attempt to speak ambiguously as he directly answered her, "She has already returned to Intis to lead a brand new life." Tracy's expression sank. A storm raged in her eyes as the aura of a pirate admiral fully revealed itself. However, Azik casually swept his gaze over and instantly made her calm down. The corners of her lips curled up. "That batch of documents from the mausoleum of the Balam Empire's royalty is indeed in my hands. But I wasn't interested in it. I flipped through it casually before handing it to the sect. Hee, even if you had succeeded in assassinating me, you wouldn't have received it. I didn't read it much, so even if you channeled my spirit, I wouldn't be able to reproduce it. Unfortunately, I can't bear to part with my life, otherwise, it definitely would have been interesting to see your disappointment." Klein calmly said, "No, I won't be disappointed. I can obtain the soul and characteristic of a demoness of affliction. I can graze you and subdue you." As he spoke, he raised his left palm which had creeping hunger on it. It was in the shape of a black glove. Tracy narrowed her eyes. The look in her eyes became extremely dangerous, like a provoked tiger. If not for the two high-sequence beyonders beside her, she might have already attacked. And the moment Klein finished his sentence, he noticed something amiss. "I'm not acting as Gehrman Sparrow at the moment, so why am I speaking in accordance with his persona?" Klein was alarmed as he suspected whether he had been too into character recently. "Remember, you can only be yourself. I cannot be influenced by the character I act as, because of prolonged acting. This will cause me to become lost and result in losing control." He quickly reflected on himself and added his conclusions into the acting principles of a faceless. Noticing his brief silence, Azik looked at Katerina Pell and said in his usual tone, "Can you copy a set of those documents for me?" "That's not a big problem." Katerina gave Tracy a glance. "Any requests?" Tracy stared at Klein and said with a clearly hoarse voice, "Tell me where Helene is." Klein withdrew his thoughts and looked at her before looking at the pure demoness of unaging, Katerina. He had already made his decision, but he couldn't help but feel hesitant. He turned to look at Mr. Azik and discovered his warm smile. He wasn't urging him or forcing him. Klein retracted his gaze and simply said, "I refuse." Chapter 589, Sowing Discord. For an instant, Klein imagined that Tracy would directly attack him, as her face was already flushing red with anger. Her blue eyes had turned dark like the surface of a sea before an impending storm. But eventually, Tracy didn't act rashly. She looked towards Katerina Pell and awaited the decision of the demoness of unaging. She knew very well that, although Sequence 5 and Sequence 4 were just separated by one level, there was a qualitative difference between them. There was no way to bridge the gap with one's battle skills or execution. One was a normal human with special powers, while the other was already a demigod, a legendary creature possessing godhood. Furthermore, The two present were clearly not sequence 4. Placed before them, Tracy felt like she was a low-sequence beyonder. Katerina Pell didn't seem furious. She looked at Klein, who wore the face of Kalangos, and chuckled as her eyes moved across him. What an interesting lad. If not for Mr. Death Consul being here, I might have not revealed the upheavals within my heart and have an unexpected encounter with you which would lead into having a pure and romantic story with you. No, you don't want to. This sounds really terrifying. Klein didn't dare look at her as he continued looking at Tracy. Seeing no response from Isaac Eggers, Katerina retracted her gaze and said to Tracy with her melodious voice, "Embrace the afflicted pain. This might be something beneficial for you." She then looked towards Isaac. "I remember that batch of documents. It records the various attempts used by the Balam royalty to revive death, but unfortunately, they seemed to fail miserably. Towards the end, they seemed to consider creating an artificial death. Are you still interested? An artificial death? How can death be artificial? Apart from the uniqueness and beyonder characteristics, how can there be other methods? It's not like it's something you can find on the street. Was the former Balam Empire and the present Numinous Episcopate all crazy?" Klein mumbled silently and didn't interrupt the conversation between the demigods. Isaac pondered for 2 seconds before asking, "What price do I need to pay?" Katerina smiled youthfully. "No, there's no need. I thought it over. Helping you regain your memories and find your past in order to become the Death Consul from before should be a rather interesting matter. This can bring more changes and fun to this world." Those words sound like a rebellious teenage girl. A demoness of unaging not only doesn't age in body but in mind as well? Klein felt it somewhat impossible to grasp her thought process. Perhaps only a sequence 6 or 5, or even sequence 4 of the spectator pathway can tell. He subconsciously guessed. Isaac nodded and extended his right hand. A piece of paper and a fountain pen in the room automatically flew over as though invisible spirits were at his service. After scribbling, he threw the paper over. "You can summon my messenger. So there's only one copper whistle. For it to remain effective for more than 1,000 years, that copper whistle is definitely no simple item." Klein instinctively wished to reach out to touch Isaac's copper whistle inside his pocket, but he held back. Katerina caught the piece of paper and scanned it before pursing her lips into a smile. "I thought you would have directly told me where in the underworld." She looked up as her blue eyes effused in indescribable warmth as she smiled faintly. "I still remember how Mr. Death Consul from before was such a powerful but cold man. He left a deep impression on me. I'm also curious as to why you would become so soft." Isaac held his fist to his mouth and shook his head with a bitter smile. "I'm immortal, but that doesn't mean I don't age. Once a person ages, they will often become placid." "No." Katerina's eyes flickered deep down as she said without concealing anything, "I look forward to the day you recover all your memories. I wish to see how you would evaluate the present you." Upon saying that, she curled her lips slightly and winked at Klein. "Perhaps we will release an existence more evil than a devil." This is her trying to sow discord, right? Klein muttered inwardly, but he couldn't help but recall the pale disaster recorded in many historical books and church tomes. It had caused a large number of casualties and had turned the northern continent into a living hell. And this disaster was mainly led by Death and the primordial Demoness, with Death's entourage and the Demonist sect from the southern continent. In this entire matter, Mr. Isaac, who was known as Death Consul, definitely played a rather important role. Isaac fell silent for a few seconds as he grabbed Klein's shoulder and pulled him into the spirit world and traversed it. Instantly, there was only Demoness of unaging Katerina Pell and Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy left in the Black Death's captain's cabin. The latter looked at the spot where the two had disappeared, and after taking a while to calm herself, she clenched her teeth and said, "I'll never forget this matter." Katerina resumed her pure demeanor and smiled faintly. "Feel the afflicted pain. The more pain you feel, the more you will realize how weak you are. When the pain reaches a threshold, the desire to change yourself will reach a certain intensity, allowing you to withstand the potion and obtain godhood during the ritual to become a demigod." When Tracy heard this, she suddenly thought of something. Her expression froze as she blurted out, Helene was able to escape the Black Death because of... Katerina smiled mildly. You are my youngest child, but you are the one who's most promising at becoming a demigod. As a mother, I will naturally want to help you. Tracy's facial muscles twitched as she said with a warped expression, That's right. I have a mother like you and a mom. Why didn't you tell me the truth in the beginning? You clearly knew the mid and low sequences of several other pathways. Katerina turned her body as her white gown fluttered. She said ethereally, We all need to approach the primordial. We are all her children. As she spoke, surging but silent black flames soared over the huge sailboat which was dozens of meters long. The flames covered every corner as they burned silently without injuring any of the pirates on the Black Death, as though they were clearing up any accumulated dust. The stacked colors quickly receded, and the indescribable transparent figure went far into the distance. Klein's spirituality suddenly stirred as he felt that the items he had left on the Black Death had all vanished. As expected of a demoness of unaging, Klein sighed. Just as he was about to say something, he felt himself plummet. He had left the spirit world with Azek. He found themselves in a mountain valley with a river flowing. There were fertile fields with a manor and town that was built in a Loanese style. Klein looked around him and discovered that he was standing in a dark cemetery that had long been abandoned. Mr. Azek, he shouted in puzzlement. Azek walked to a grave with a broken tombstone that was covered in weeds. He said solemnly, After meeting Katerina Pell, I recalled some matters again. I once told you that in a particular dream, in one of my lives, I had a daughter. She had soft black hair and enjoyed sitting in a swing I made myself while requesting sweets from me. When traversing the spirit world, I suddenly sensed the call of my bloodline. Klein was infected with his emotions as he asked solemnly, Is this her? Azek nodded and crouched down. He touched the half tombstone as his bronze face wore a gentle, sorrowful and confused look. This is her grave. If I recall correctly, she's been dead for 926 years. 926 years. Klein wanted to say something, but he was stopped by that extended period of time. If it wasn't for the church's compelling people to be buried in cemeteries and providing a certain degree of surveillance, it would have been hard to find this grave and tombstone, since there hadn't been any all-out wars since the Fifth Epoch. A human's life was on the order of decades, but this was 926 years. After a long moment of silence in the cemetery, Azek got up again and grabbed Klein's shoulder. I'll send you back first. After a few minutes of traversing the spirit world, Klein saw the white bedsheets and yellowish-brown floorboards. Azek pressed down on his hat and said in a deep voice, I'll continue my journey while you continue on your adventures. Klein nodded. Just as he was about to say something, he saw Mr. Azek curl his lips and smile. Were you afraid that I would become an evil person like a demoness after fully recovering my memories? Before Klein could reply, Azek sighed. I'm also very worried. But I have a greater desire for discovering myself. After saying that, the surrounding aqueous void around him rippled as he vanished from the room. For a long period of time, Klein stood in his spot, silent. He shook his head and laughed silently as he consoled himself, perhaps when the time comes, I'll already be a powerhouse at the level of Angel. I can establish a treatment facility that treats antisocial personalities and have Miss Justice be the head doctor. Retracting his thoughts, Klein sat down and habitually reflected over his operation. I originally thought that I could graze a demoness of affliction and obtain Death's Chronicles while making further progress in the human disappearances. Who knew that the development and outcome were completely out of my expectations? I only managed to complete the initial goals. Sigh, I cannot incite Mr. Azek to take action since he hasn't completely recovered. Furthermore, the person we were facing was a demoness of unaging. What's most important is to be strong myself. Relying on myself is better than asking for help from others. On careful consideration, I do rely on myself most of the time. I can attack the human disappearance cases from the angle of the buyer, that crazy Captain Connors Victor. Klein changed his sitting posture and nodded to himself as he murmured inwardly, The greatest gain that I received was to establish the preliminary acting principles of a faceless. It's to get into character and be detached, overcome any aversions, and to be careful about being too immersed in the role. This way, by relying only on simple, ordinary, real acting, perhaps it will take a year or two to digest the potion. But for me, I should be able to fully digest it in about 4 to 6 months. After reflecting on the matter, Klein prepared to sleep. He planned on taking down the radio transceiver from above the gray fog once it was daybreak, so as to establish communications with the magic mirror, Rhodes. Of course, he had to first divine the level of danger above the gray fog. Chapter 590. Rhodes's bottom line early in the morning, above the gray fog. Klein conjured a pen and paper as he deliberated over the divination statement. Using the radio transceiver is dangerous. After carefully checking the statement twice, he took out the spirit pendulum under his left sleeve and began divining. During this process, he was on high alert and was somewhat afraid. He was like a child covering his ears while lighting firecrackers. If the outcome would involve the true creator or the primordial demoness, then he would encounter danger simply from divining it. If it were any other person, they would only end up losing control or dying. However, Klein had the gray fog to shield him and prevent him from having such a tragic outcome. Hence, it was obvious that anything that happened above the gray fog was better than courting death in the real world. He was afraid that the using it repeatedly would allow the evil gods to lock onto him and personally pay him a visit. He quickly entered the state of cogitation and silently recited the divination. After chanting 7 times, he knew the answer without opening his eyes, since he was completely fine sitting there in his seat and wasn't suffering from any extreme pain. When Klein looked at the dangling topaz, he discovered that it was indeed spinning counterclockwise. Phew. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and immediately returned to the real world and began preparing a ritual to bring the radio transceiver from above the gray fog to the real world. After about half an hour, he finally heard the radio transceiver produce its clickety-clack. An illusory piece of white paper was spat out with lines of Loanese words written on it. "I'm here. Great Master, is that you? Why does it feel like it's craning its neck?" Klein suddenly recalled the emoticons from his previous life. It was an adorable alpaca that craned its neck out. He took 2 steps forward and tersely answered in a reserved manner. Amidst clicking sounds, more illusory paper was spat out. "Your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, at your service." Klein hid his discomfort in the depths of his heart and asked, "Rhodes, tell me, where is Roy King from the Life School of Thought?" Due to the chubby apothecary's description, he knew that the organization developed itself based on a master and apprentice system. He inferred that they grasped the 2 beyonder pathways of monster and apothecary. This matched the characteristics of the Life School of Thought. Meanwhile, Klein prepared Roy King's picture, with the intention of relying on himself rather than on others. The tapping sounds intensified as Rhodes produced a portrait with the radio transceiver. It was none other than Roy King with his hair neatly combed back while wearing a framed pair of glasses. "Is this him?" A line of Loanese appeared behind the portrait. Klein nodded. "Yes." Rhodes made the radio transceiver's tapping sound turn abnormally brisk. "Great Master, the person you wish to find is imprisoned in the Governor General's office of the City of Generosity, Byam." "Locked in the Governor General's office?" Klein frowned slightly and wasn't in a rush to continue asking. He said with confidence and frankness, "All right, according to your rules, it's your turn to ask." Rhodes used the radio transceiver to produce a smiley face and a line of text. "I've already asked and you have already answered." "When did that happen?" Klein was taken aback before looking at the content before the illusory piece of paper. He saw the previous question, "Is it him? This works? That actually counts?" In that instant, Klein finally understood how much freedom Rhodes had to its rules. Against any ordinary person, it could be as strict and vile as it wanted. It even needed spectators, but when it came to Klein, those rules were ignored, and he blatantly made it easy. How did this guy adopt such a personality? Klein considered for 2 seconds before asking another question. "Rhodes, Do you know the book, Grosel's Travels? Rhodes fell silent for 2 seconds before making the radio transceiver type. It spat out more illusory paper. Great master, your question is too nice for me. All I needed to do was answer, yes, to be done with the question. I've modified the question a little, changing it to, tell me what you know about Grosel's Travels. This is a very magical book. Many of its owners have vanished. I'm unable to tell who its creator is, but I'm certain that it first appeared among the dragons, after the disappearance of the City of Miracles, Liveseed. It appeared after the City of Miracles, Liveseed, which was conjured by the Dragon of Imagination, Ankwelt. I might be able to recommend this to Miss Justice. She might be interested. If she really wishes to buy it as a middleman, I can study it ahead of time above the gray fog. If something bad happens from the study, resulting in the complete destruction of the book, I can tell her that the seller went back on their word and a refund was made. Thinking of this, being a platform is really promising. Klein's thoughts raced as he said to the radio transceiver, it's your turn. I do want to know what kind of odd question you can ask. Klein thought silently. Rhodes didn't pause as he produced a line in Loanese. Great master, I've already asked and you have already answered. When did that happen? Klein looked in confusion and amusement at the first few pages of illusory paper before finally seeing the so-called question at the beginning. Great master, is that you? I have to say that this magic mirror named Rhodes really shows no shame when it tries to suck up to me. However, such a paired question format really satisfies an OCD. It's like the AND operator back when I studied programming languages myself. Klein cleared his throat and continued asking, why was Roy King imprisoned in the Governor General's office? The radio transceiver produced its clickety-clack and spat out illusory paper. Ever since the disappearance of the Snake of Mercury from the Life School of Thought, the organization fractured and encountered plenty of danger. Some even died at the hands of the Rose School of Thought. The Life School of Thought developed in a secretive manner with the master and apprentice format, but they have an elder council among the upper echelons. They harmonized the conflicts between the different internal factions. Since the fifth epoch, the Elder Council changed to a more trendy name known as the Fate Council. There are 7 counselors, and the Snake of Mercury is the president. Roy King's teacher is one of the Fate counselors and had got into trouble after the Snake of Mercury's disappearance. And before this, he had handed an important sealed artifact of the Life School of Thought to Roy King. This is the reason why Roy King was secretly captured by the lone military. The disappearance of the Snake of Mercury? Klein instantly made the connection to Will Septon, who was hiding in Backlund, as well as the other Snake of Mercury that had been pursuing him without ever showing its face. Klein suspected the other Snake of Mercury to be Angel of Fate, Ouroboros. The Life School of Thought Snake of Mercury is definitely not the one searching for Will Septon, as he has had plenty of opportunities to contact his organization and not be missing. Perhaps it's Will Septon or a third snake. This cannot be determined. Klein gently nodded and said to the radio transceiver, ask. I'm sure you haven't asked me any other questions. Hee, let's see what you'll ask. I have to say, people have a little bit of masochism in them. Others are afraid of Rhodes's questions, but it has already waved off 2 questions for me. Now, I do wish for it to formally ask me a question. Klein waited with piqued interest. The radio transceiver's sounds suddenly became somewhat solemn as the illusory piece of paper spat out with increasing difficulty. Well, great master, what should I do to be a better, loyal, and humble servant? I've underestimated your bottom line. Klein restrained his exasperated expression as he replied in a deep voice, just maintain your present state. All right. The tapping sounds became lighter again. The aura is about to disperse. Your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, awaits to be at your service. Finally, Rhodes added a drawing of a hand waving. It's really talented. That's right, it's not hard for a magic mirror that knows so much to know such things. Klein watched as the radio transceiver turned silent. He took a few steps and sat by the edge of the bed, considering the matter regarding Roy King. He had no intention of infiltrating Byam's Governor General's office and rescuing Roy King under the military's tight security. This was because he didn't know the man at all, and he hadn't even seen him before. The only connection they had was through the chubby apothecary. The basement of the Church of Storms definitely has many Beyonders locked up there. But what has that got to do with me? Klein chuckled as he shook his head. In the information provided to him by Rhodes, Klein noticed that the mystical item which Admiral of Blood Seigneur had, which made him sufficiently lucky, came from the life school of thought. There was a high probability that the faction backing this pirate admiral was the Rose School of Thought. They were taking advantage of the Snake of Mercury's disappearance, so they could kill members of the Life School of Thought. This also reminds me that I need to be more careful than before when dealing with pirate admirals. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy had gotten Demonis of Unaging Katarina Pell without any notice. The other pirate admirals wouldn't be without their supporters. They often represent a faction, an organization. Admiral of Blood is backed by the Rose School of Thought, while Admiral of Stars is backed by the Moses Ascetic Order, as well as for our Tarot Club. The backer of Admiral Hell is likely the Numinous Episcopate and the King of the Five Seas. As for Vice Admiral Iceberg, she's likely backed by the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The backers for Vice Admiral Deep Sea and Vice Admiral Dusk are currently unknown, but it's definitely impossible that they relied solely on themselves to reign supreme over the seas for so many years. Now on second thought, which faction was backing Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos? The one that gave him creeping hunger, or the unspeakable organization that instigated him to assassinate Duke Negan? Yes, I must be careful not to expose my intention of hunting pirate admirals in the future. Furthermore, I can only make one attempt and immediately distance myself if I fail. As Klein's thoughts varied, he suddenly thought of something. The paper crane that was personally folded by that Snake of Mercury, Will Ossepton, was still with him. Chapter 591. Making good use of things. Klein's memories of the paper crane were still fresh on his mind. Back then, Will Ossepton had used this item to locate Dr. Aaron's astral projection and injected information into him while he was dreaming of the spirit world in his dreams. It created a revelation that evolved into a specific dream. Klein later exchanged a paper crane he had folded himself for Will Ossepton's and had gone above the gray fog to make a divination. He failed to gain any effective conclusions until Dr. Aaron's wife got pregnant. By calculating the time and from his understanding of the situation between a sequence 1 and sequence 0, he guessed that Will Ossepton was performing a cyclic restart, and he guessed that Will was in an intense battle with another Snake of Fate for the position of sequence 0. And the nightmare that came with the paper crane was only an auxiliary outcome. Its true purpose was to help Will Ossepton secretly become a fetus. What was most humorous about this matter was that the paper crane that Klein had folded had ended up being treated as the original from Will Ossepton, and the Nighthawks had used even cruder means to replicate one to swap them. Will Ossepton's paper crane had always been above the gray fog after I had thrown it up there. I nearly forgot about it. Performing divination on it can only gain an extremely vague revelation. If there weren't any other developments, it would be hard to infer that the child conceived by Dr. Aaron's wife was Willa Rhodes. On the contrary, Willa Rhodes can use it to locate it in the spirit world, just like how a Rhodes can rely on the gray fog's aura to connect to the radio transceiver via the spirit world. There seems to be some possibility for this matter. Klein suddenly sat straight and had an extremely creative idea. He wanted to use the paper crane to communicate with Will Ossepton in a dream. This might not be of any use to me, the present me. There might even be certain hidden dangers, but if Will Ossepton is really the Snake of Fate from the Life School of Thought, my act of providing him with intelligence will definitely win me a favorable impression. Towards an existence at the level of a king of angels, it's necessary to make investments ahead of time. If I wait until he's really born, I might be repaid dozens of times over. Since I won't die from trying, I can still revive if I die. Although Klein had such a thought, he was in fact very cautious. He planned on divining the danger above the gray fog before deciding on executing his plan. After busying himself and confirming that the danger involved was acceptable, he used a ritual to bring back the paper crane from above the gray fog into the real world. Perhaps it was because it came from a sequence one snake of fate. The paper crane didn't exhibit any peculiarities from its prolonged stay above the gray fog. It remained ordinary. I hope the aura above the gray fog didn't neutralize its uniqueness, otherwise, Will Septon won't be able to locate it. The sequence before Snake of Fate is Soothsayer. Would this matter already be within Will Septon's expectations? The reason why he chose Dr. Aaron is because he's my friend. And by doing so, he can establish a connection with me? Am I being too narcissistic? However, this question is worth suspecting. After Will Septon used the paper crane to locate Dr. Aaron, he could have directly reincarnated, so why did he repeatedly make him have nightmares? Furthermore, the dream also indicated the struggle between the snakes of fate. To an ordinary person, they would neither understand it or play a meaningful role in this matter. Isn't this like using a gaze to entice a blind person? Will Septon created the dream for me? Klein frowned slightly and had certain guesses. He suppressed his puzzlement and picked up a fountain pen. As he filled it with ink, he considered a sentence to leave on the paper crane to garner Will Septon's attention. What should I write? Klein recalled what Rhodes had informed him about the situation with the life school of thought, and he felt that there was one line that could encompass everything while feeling extremely fresh and filled with emotions. That line was, "Your home blew up." This sentence is overly crude and direct while lacking manners. Besides, Will Septon might not be the president of the life school of thought. Klein deliberated and slightly spread open the paper crane. On the different surfaces, he wrote different words that formed a very short sentence. Roy King has been captured. After doing all of this, Klein put down the fountain pen and placed the paper crane into his wallet, just like Dr. Aaron had done before. In the periphery of the Rørsted Sea, on a gigantic fog-covered island far from the main sea routes. Amidst a shrill cry, a blue bird of prey that resembled a shadow had plummeted from the sky and crashed heavily into the ground. It sent soil scattering as its blood splattered. Alger Wilson remained cautious. He stood far away and raised his left hand, which had an iron-black ring on his thumb. He pointed it at the terrifying beyonder creature known as a blue shadow falcon. On the tip of the ring was a spike-like protrusion. It was tainted with old blood, looking ancient and sinister. This was the mystical item he had bought from an artisan, using Steel Mavadi's bounty. He publicly claimed that it cost him £5,200 despite it actually only costing £3,100. The ring's name was Whip of Mind. It could deliver irresistible, intense mental damage to an enemy. Apart from that, it could strengthen Alger's mastery of various weapons. Therefore, it wasn't actually very expensive. Back then, the artisan and his friend had two mystical items. One was the Whip of Mind, and the other was the Ring of Witchcraft. The latter had more abilities and high adaptability while costing almost the same as the former. It was a better choice, but after serious consideration, Alger still chose the Whip of Mind. He believed that without such an item, his hunting of the blue shadow falcon would be several times more difficult. This was because it was a beyonder creature that could fly. And reality had proven that his judgment was right. For this, Alger was willing to experience a constant headache, a nagging feeling that made him want to slam his head into a wall. After waiting for several minutes, he saw points of light float up from the blue shadow falcon. 6 crystalline feathers condensed around its wing as Alger heaved a sigh of relief and walked over. He had a flaxen cloth tied around his forehead, and embedded inside it was a blood-red gem that emitted a light that resembled the moonlight. This was meant to be the vampire baron inheritance for Emlyn White, but Alger wasn't in a hurry to complete the transaction after obtaining it. Instead, he used the characteristic, which he could use to a certain extent, to add insurance to his hunt for the blue shadow falcon. At times, being a middleman is rather nice. Alger put away the 6 crystalline feathers as he sighed silently. He straightened his body and looked towards the towering mountain peak and dense forest around it on the primitive island. He felt that many indescribable dangers lurked there. My strength is insufficient to explore the area. Alger retracted his gaze and walked towards the island's periphery, constantly wary for any predators around him. Soon, he jumped into the sea, and with his powers as a seafarer, he easily swam into the distance. His ghost ship was anchored there, and his sailors were still sleeping thanks to the sanguine's anesthetic gas. To come to this primitive island, the ship had to steer away from the main sea routes. In a situation where sea monsters lurked while the storms lingered, navigating would take at least 6 hours, with the danger of sinking at any moment. Only a seafarer who was familiar with the route could bring the ship close. Deep into the night, Klein, who had rested an entire day, put down his newspapers and burrowed into bed. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly thought of a problem. Now that Danitz has returned to the Golden Dream, would it be a waste for me to stay in a large suite alone? Klein nodded indiscernibly and decided to check out at daybreak and switch to another inn. After making up his mind, he quickly fell asleep. Suddenly, his mind became clear from its prior haziness. He knew that some force had intruded into his dream. I'm very impressive to be able to sense the dream intrusion of a snake of fate. No, the gray fog is very impressive. Klein surveyed his surroundings and discovered that he was located in a pitch-black, desolate plain. Not far away was a black steeple. This was a scene he had formerly seen in Dr. Aaron's dream, but at this moment, there wasn't a mysterious silver giant snake on the steeple. Klein nodded in thought as he sped up his pace and entered the pitch-black steeple. It remained ancient and decadent. The layout was chaotic, with the staircase occasionally spiraling upwards and dropping downwards diagonally at times. Some of the rooms were normal, others were upside down, and there were others that were embedded into other parts. Passing through, door after door and wall after wall, Klein once again arrived deep inside the Black Tower. There were tarot cards scattered around here as they clustered towards the ground in the middle, which was slightly protruded. There was a line of silver words and a portrait. The portrait was that of the chubby apothecary, and the silver words formed the sentence, "Inform Darkwill." So the chubby apothecary's name is Darkwill. Will Septon really is the snake of fate from the life school of thought. And I really can use the paper crane to communicate with him in a dream. Klein waited for a moment, and seeing that there weren't any other revelations, he exited the dream and fell asleep again. After daybreak, Klein asked if there weren't any additional charges for checking out at noon. He then put on his top hat and rode a carriage to the Red Theater's entrance. This famous brothel was in its quietest period of the day. It was like it was a ghost house. Klein glanced at it before walking diagonally across to the alley and arriving outside Darkwill's folk herb store. He suddenly sensed something as he looked up at the roof, and he saw a fat owl perched there looking at him. The chubby apothecary was apparently attempting to tame a beyonder animal before. Klein retracted his gaze in thought as he knocked on the door. Thump, 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 thump. After waiting for a while, he saw Darkwill open the door with his eyes hardly open. "You aren't sick," Darkwill said after observing him. Klein maintained Gehrman Sparrow's cold expression and politely widened the corners of his mouth. "Good morning, Mr. Apothecary. I've found your teacher." "For real?" Darkwill asked in disbelief. "You just received the mission the day before yesterday." Chapter 592. 3 advancements in a week. What has me receiving the mission the day before yesterday have to do with when I find him? If I didn't need to spend a day waiting for the snake of fate, Will Septon, to locate me, I could have done so 24 hours earlier. That's what professionalism is. Klein answered calmly, "You can choose not to hear what I have to say." Darkwill choked back the words he had prepared as his facial muscles twitched. "Go ahead and say it." Klein described flatly, "I received intel that Roy King has been captured by the military and is presently imprisoned in the Governor General's office. News I received from a Rhodes," he added inwardly. "For real?" Darkwill couldn't hold back again as he widened his eyes and blurted out a retort. Klein nodded indiscernibly and said, "My information source is sufficiently reliable." "But I have no way of confirming it," Darkwill said in hesitation. "This is because it involves an important sealed artifact of the life school of thought," Klein said directly. Darkwill immediately jumped in fright as he took 2 steps back and looked around warily, afraid that someone had heard what Klein had just said. Can this sort of thing be said out on the street? He knows that we're from the life school of thought, and he knows that old man is involved in an important sealed artifact. I only learned of that from my last communication with him. Darkwill gradually began to believe the adventurer in front of him. Klein swept a glance at the owl who swooped down and landed on the chubby apothecary's shoulder. You can make your payment. I can't confirm it. I can't just believe what you say, right? Darkwill said stubbornly. Then, he saw the eyes of the adventurer in front of him turn abnormally cold. He trembled and hurriedly said, All right. I'll barely count it as you completing the mission. Unwillingly, he took out a wad of cash from a secret pocket in his witch doctor robes and handed Klein 100 pounds in change. Although he was a Beyonder, the physical enhancements he obtained from his job as an apothecary and beast tamer wasn't enough to play a role in direct combat. He wasn't necessarily able to defeat an ordinary person with a revolver. As for the Beyonder pet he reared, it was also a fellow without any combat powers. Faced with an experienced and resourceful adventurer who was also likely a Beyonder, both he and the owl together wasn't necessarily his match. All he could do was act as he said. It wasn't easy saving up that amount of money, he lamented inwardly. It was indeed profitable being an apothecary, even more so when out in the colonies. There were pirates, sailors, and adventurers. There were all sorts of people, and the official organizations were more relaxed on enforcing the rules. He could sell certain banned medicine without anyone coming to knock at his door. For the past 2 months, just the customers from the Red Theater was enough to earn him more than what he previously earned in a year. However, as a Beyonder, his expenses were huge as well. The savings he had primarily been expended when advancing to Beast Tamer. Later, he reared a pet and with great difficulty bought the potion formula and ingredients for it. He also purchased defensive charms for himself, leaving him only a few £100 in savings. Klein received the cash and, while counting it, verified their authenticity before putting it in his pocket and leaving. After seeing Klein's figure disappear from the alley, Darkwill's expression sank. It's too dangerous here. Too dangerous. I have to leave as quickly as possible. As he mumbled, he returned inside his herb store. Once inside, he dragged a brown suitcase and quickly stuffed all sorts of clothes and cash which had been folded neatly into it. Finally, he poured out the notes and coins of different denominations from the cash register, stuffed them into his pocket, and took the fake identification documents he had spent a fortune on. With the brown suitcase, he walked out of his folk herb store. Looking back at the various medicinal ingredients he hadn't finished selling yet, Darkwill's chubby face clearly twitched. He took a breath and locked the door while resisting his aching heart. He went straight for the harbor by getting a rental carriage, heading for Byam's liner ticketing company. It's too dangerous, way too dangerous. Old man has been caught. He's been caught. He sat in the carriage and repeated himself silently as he trembled. In this state he finally arrived at the ticketing company, and after paying for the carriage, he rushed into the lobby and queued up for the liner to East Balam. Phew, phew. Darkwill kept taking a few deep breaths as he closely followed the customer ahead of him and shifted forward. Get me the first ship out of here, he emphasized to himself. As he sporadically inched forward, Darkwill finally calmed down. His expression occasionally turned twisted before quickly calming down. This repeated numerous times. When there was only one customer left in front of him, Darkwill paused on the spot. Udamas. He cursed himself and immediately turned around, carried his suitcase, and walked out the ticketing lobby with his identification documents. Klein didn't care how Darkwill was saving his teacher, Roy King. He believed that it wasn't something that needed his concern. They have the life school of thought backing them. Even if they recently fractured, they're an ancient organization that was born in the early 5th epoch, making it have hundreds of years of history. It has a considerable heritage. Chubby Apothecary will naturally be able to find someone to help. If even the life school of thought can't do it, it will be useless even if I get the entire tarot club to help. So there's no need for me to worry for him. The military in Byam has a demigod. Of course, he might not be in the Governor General's office and might be in the military base. Inside the carriage, Klein took out his wallet and looked at the paper crane in it, wondering if he should immediately throw it above the gray fog. I'll wait longer. Perhaps that snake of fate, Will Ossepton, might want to give me some perks. I should prepare a pencil next time. I neglected a problem. A paper crane is only this big. Using a fountain pen will quickly leave it without space to write. That will make me unable to contact Will Ossepton and end up just waiting passively. And I can't keep the paper crane on me all day. In a few days, I'll send it back to the junk pile above the gray fog. After all, I cannot always have Will Ossepton tracking me. I have to be careful. Klein quickly made a decision and returned to the Wind of Azure Inn, packed his suitcase, and checked out of the luxurious suite. To his delight, on Dannett's second time here, he had made a prepayment, making him responsible for the 5 solely in fees. Soon, Klein switched to a different district and came to Odom Street, which was close to Amira's Leaf Bar. He stayed in an inn called Tiana. He got a clean and simple room which cost him 2 solely 2 pence every day. There was also a complimentary cup of fruit juice squeezed from the gigantic fruit named Tiana. As he drank the slightly sweet milky fruit juice, Klein no longer cared about his image. He slumped into a reclining chair and decided to daze off and take a nap for the next 2 hours before going above the gray fog to browse through the prayers of his believers to experience the different facades people have. Backlund, the White family. Emlyn looked at the blood-red gem that appeared in front of him at the altar, and he seemed to be able to hear it resonating with his blood. After thanking Mr. Fool, he picked up the gem and felt the uniqueness flowing within it, so as to confirm that it was the inheritance from a sanguine baron. As long as I prepare the corresponding inheritance ritual and supplementary ingredients, I'll become a baron. And this isn't difficult at this stage, Emlyn thought with anticipation and glee. According to the human system, I would be a Sequence 6 Beyonder. The corresponding name is Potions Professor. In the blink of an eye, it was Monday again. Above the fog sea, a fleet was tearing through the thin fog and blue sea. Their flagship was a gigantic sailboat which hung a unique flag on it. It depicted an eyelashless eye with 10 stars surrounding it. Admiral of Stars Katlia stood by the window of the captain's cabin as she quietly looked at the sunlight that shone through the thin fog until the wall clock produced its cuckoo. She glanced at the time and quickly converted the time to lone time. She then pulled the curtains and sat behind her desk. Placed on the red wooden table were a brass sextant and a light blue celestial globe. The latter's surface had a large swath of blankness, regions that hadn't been explored or were impossible to explore. Katlia reached out her fingers and played with the celestial globe before closing her eyes as she awaited the fool's summoning. Before long, a crimson light flooded her eyes, drowning the prepared her completely. By the time she got used to the changes, she found herself in the holy palace propped up with stone columns. She was before a long, mottled bronze table. While Miss Justice was greeting everyone energetically, Katlia also expressed her respects to Mr. Fool, who was still covered in the grayish-white fog. She did a simple sweep, and her black eyes with a slight tinge of purple suddenly constricted. She realized that the hanged man, the moon, and the sun who were sitting opposite her had slight changes in their outward spirituality. It was different from before. This indicated that they had advanced. This meant that they had advanced in the past few days. In just a week, 3 Tarot Club members have advanced. It's likely that the Hanged Man and the Moon have already reached Sequence 6. Is this a coincidence? They happen to consume the potion this week? In terms of probability, there's a possibility. The Moon and the Sun were purchasing ingredients last week, but this also serves to show that the Tarot Club members advance very quickly, otherwise there wouldn't be such a coincidence. Of course, it's not strange to advance quickly below Sequence 5 once a Beyonder masters the acting method and isn't lacking in resources. From Sequence 6 to Sequence 5, there's a need for a ritual, and the digestion becomes increasingly difficult. It's difficult for such matters to happen again. Katlia retracted her gaze. Following that, Audrey apologized to Mr. Fool, saying that she hadn't been in contact with the psychology alchemists recently and wasn't able to provide any Roselle diary pages. Furs was in a similar situation. Her teacher was slow in replying to her, and the cold weather outside left her resistant against the idea of heading out. Having just advanced and having many things to settle, Derek wasn't able to produce new ancient myths. Klein could only calmly nod. Upon seeing this, Derek heaved a sigh of relief and turned his head to the other end of the long bronze table. Mr. World, I've obtained the method for separating a Beyonder characteristic from the mental corruption left by a rampager. Don't say it so directly. At the other end of the bronze table, Klein's expression nearly froze. Little son, although you have promised several times in the past, making Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man know of this matter, can't you see that Ma'am Hermit just joined? Klein resisted the urge to facepalm. Chapter 593. Solution: the method for separating a rampager's mental corruption from a Beyonder characteristic. The hermit Katlia shot a glance at the world and guessed that he might have obtained 1 to 2 Beyonder characteristics that a rampager left behind. In addition, one of them likely involved the advancement characteristic for the world or someone close to him. This was a very easy inference, since if one didn't use a Beyonder characteristic as the main ingredient of a potion, the mental corruption of a rampager in it didn't matter if it was made into a mystical item. At worst, the negative side effects would be extremely strong, making it equivalent to a sealed artifact, but that didn't mean that there was no way of using it. After adjusting his emotions, Klein controlled the world to answer hoarsely, "Write it on a piece of paper and pass it to me." With that said, Klein originally wished to encourage Little Sun for being a trustworthy person, but upon considering how the world's image was that of a gloomy and reserved person who didn't say anything else unless he had ulterior motives, he instantly fell into a slight dilemma. No, there's an ulterior motive. By letting Little Sun maintain his principles, it will make things a lot easier in the future. To put it simply, it will be easier to fleece him. Of course, I'll have to suffer the damage from his honesty and uprightness as a result. The world is an experienced and shrewd Beyonder in the eyes of Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and the others. They likely wouldn't notice any problems. Klein's mind raced as he made the world let out a deep laugh. You're really a trustworthy person. Your character is worthy of praise. The Hanged Man pricked up his brows and took the initiative to say to Derek, I'm also interested in the knowledge regarding this. What can I use to trade for this information? He planned to do the transaction if it wasn't too expensive, and he would give up if it exceeded his expectations. After all, he didn't have any use for it at the moment. Having been praised, Derek was still lost in his joy. After 2 seconds of thought, he said with abnormal sincerity, Mr. Hanged Man, there's no need. You've often been giving me suggestions in the past when I was faced with trials. Just treat it as a way of showing my appreciation. If the world is a real person and was drinking, he definitely would have spewed out all the water in his mouth. Thankfully, he's neither drinking, nor is he real. Klein mustered all the Beyonder powers of a clown to ensure his expression remained unchanged. The Hanged Man was briefly at a loss for words. The son's reply was completely out of his expectations. He had been traveling the seas for years and had experienced numerous encounters. His outlook on things was no longer that of black and white, with it mainly shades of gray. At this moment, he felt a baffling sense of guilt. Your character is really worthy of praise. Alger quickly composed himself and praised Little Sunday. Don't copy what I said. Can't you use a different sentence? The world glanced at the Hanged Man as the fool lamented how wily old foxes were all one and the same. No, he's dumber than an ass. A dumb sheep. The moon Emlyn silently condemned the sun. From this morning, he had been filled with anticipation for this tarot gathering, as he had already advanced to Baron and had wished to find a chance to covertly flaunt himself. They might not be able to tell, apart from Mr. Fool. Mr. Hanged Man likely can guess it. I should do something later to let them know that I'm an honorable Lord Baron. Emlyn pondered as he listened. Towards Little Sun's words, Justice Audrey didn't feel any guilt or anger, as she knew very well that Mr. Hanged Man had been the one who had been guiding him every time. The others were only occasionally giving suggestions. This is the natural result of being a good person. I hope Mr. Hanged Man will become kinder in the future. She watched this scene in delight and didn't have the urge to spend money to obtain the method for separating the mental corruption from a beyonder characteristic. Derek quickly turned around and obtained Mr. Fool's approval and conjured 2 yellowish-brown goatskin parchments. Klein controlled the world and took a piece. He scanned it impatiently. There are 2 methods. The first is to use an item that can steal the beyonder powers of others. Extract the mental corruption left behind by a rampager and concoct the beyonder characteristic into a potion before the theft loses effect. This way, the mental corruption will have nowhere to go and will directly dissipate. The second is to hold a ritual and pray to one of the 2 mystical items in our City of Silver. Use its feedback to shatter the beyonder characteristic and let the mental corruption expire. After that, the beyonder characteristic will automatically gather together slowly. I only managed to obtain the corresponding ritual's procedure and was unable to obtain the precise description of the item. Only the elders of the 6-member council have the right to know it and preside over such a ritual. The ritual's procedure is... Thoughts went through Klein's mind as he nearly forgot to control the dummy, the world. The first method is indeed something I never considered before. The sealed artifact, Blood Vessel Thief, behind the Chinese Gate in Tingen City is able to steal a target's beyonder powers. By viewing a mental corruption as one of them, there's nothing wrong with this logic. But here comes the problem. The mental corruption inside the all-black eye isn't that of an ordinary beyonder but from the evil god, true creator. Regardless of if it's the beyonder who's stealing the power or a mystical item of a similar trait, it will not be able to withstand such mental corruption. The former has a 100% chance of losing control, while the latter will directly be corrupted. In theory, I can sacrifice a similar mystical item and use it to replace the all-black eye's corruption. However, the timing has to be done perfectly without any errors. Otherwise, the 2 items might end up corrupted. Klein quickly analyzed the viability of the first option. As for the second option, it was similar to his and Edwina's previous guess. Only the details were somewhat different. The 2 powerful mystical items in the City of Silver are, at best, grade 0. Basically, it can't be a true god sequence 0 remains. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in such a pathetic state in the forsaken land of the gods. Therefore, does it mean that in order to shatter a beyonder characteristic, one doesn't need a god's strength? It's enough to do it at the level of an angel? According to Little Sun, an angel is equivalent to a subsidiary god and can barely be considered a god. This matter can be verified. Sea god Calvetua only obtained a portion of Calamity Kohainam's characteristic. The remaining part is in the Book of Calamity. There might even be a third part. I wonder where it's hidden since it helps this high elf, at the level of an angel, be able to resist death. In short, it can be seen that Kohainam's beyonder characteristic was split into at least 2 parts. This is essentially the same as shattering a beyonder characteristic. With all the evidence validating each other, I can make a preliminary conclusion that as long as the ritual is right, the feedback of a powerhouse at the angel level will be able to shatter a beyonder characteristic. Then, here comes the problem. Where do I find an angel? Mr. Azek might be one at his peak, but he clearly hasn't recovered yet. As for Saints, Snake of Fate, Willosepton, is only a fetus that hasn't even been born at the moment. Klein didn't spend too much time thinking, deciding to consider how to resolve the problem after the tarot gathering ended. With that, Alger quickly scanned the area and gained an understanding to a certain degree. Towards this, he had a theory. Getting the world to seek the method to separate the mental corruption from a beyonder characteristic is likely a test Mr. Fool had given to his blessed. But does this imply that Mr. Fool's strength has only recovered to the level of a saint and not an angel? Otherwise, there's no need to go through such trouble. He could have directly removed it. How long has it been? It's just been 7 months and Mr. Fool has already recovered to this extent. Right, he can already respond in place of sea god Calvetua. In another 1 to 2 years, he will likely be able to escape from his seal. Standing at the pinnacle as an angel, he will just be 1 step short of the ultimate goal. Ignoring the hanged man's reaction, Katlia looked at the hanged man and thought for a few seconds before chuckling. I'm not sure if those methods include one of the methods I know of. I can provide it for free. An unshadowed of the sun pathway can directly cleanse away the mental corruption in a beyonder characteristic. Ma'am Hermit is a lot more proactive than the last time. Has she adjusted her state of mind, or does she have a motive? Or could it be that she's discovered that everyone else is a weakling, so there's no need to be too careful? Klein was first surprised with Katlia's attitude before being delighted that he had obtained a third method. It was from the sun pathway which the City of Silver lacked. But I can't find the help of an unshadowed, although I do have an incomplete unshadowed potion formula. He controlled the world to deliberate for a moment before having him turn to Katlia to laugh deeply. Thank you for your generosity, Ma'am Hermit. Following that, he switched to the demeanor of a salesman and asked Derek, do you know of a book named Grozel's Travels? Derek thought seriously before honestly shaking his head. No. Klein nearly failed to continue what he had to say, but thankfully he steadied himself and let the world explain himself. It's a magical book that originates from dragons. Many of its owners have vanished. Originates from dragons? Audrey keenly noticed this important point as she asked with interest. Yes, a beyonder plans on selling it for £8,000, the world said hoarsely. He didn't raise the price above Edwina's offer because he had yet to bargain with her. This was where he could profit on the trade. Besides, even if Edwina insisted on £8,000, he could still obtain Grozel's Travels and study it. It was worth the time he spent closing the deal. Audrey pursed her lips slightly as she darted her eyes around a little and cautiously asked, what's so magical about it? It requires further study. The world chose to be honest. I'll consider it. Audrey wasn't in a hurry to agree to it because £8,000 was also a considerable sum of money to her as well. Especially with her having just been reimbursed for lie, it was very difficult for her father, Earl Hall, to accept a book of unknown purpose. And if she were to rely on herself, it would take her at least 3 to 4 months. This was built on the premise that she had already purchased the psychiatrist's beyonder characteristic for Susie. Hence, she turned to ask the world about the psychiatrist beyonder characteristic. I mainly spent this week hunting Vice Admiral Ailment and failed. I didn't find a grazing target to switch to. Klein was instantly left somewhat embarrassed, feeling as though the world's shrewd image had been damaged. Chapter 594. The World's Commission. Thankfully, the world didn't have the ability to blush red. As long as he wasn't controlled, there was no change to his state. He chuckled darkly. Another few more days. Audrey nodded with a reserved attitude and didn't rush him. This was because Susie didn't express any desire in advancing anytime soon. After all, she was only a dog. The Hanged Man, the Moon, and the Sun had just advanced a few days ago, so they were in the stage of converging their spirituality and practicing their new beyonder powers. They had no desire to purchase the subsequent potion formulas or corresponding sanguine inheritance. They calmly waited until the transaction phase came to an end. Besides, they didn't have spare cash. Although Alger had lowered the price Emlyn White had to pay for the Sanguine Baron inheritance to £4,300 and £300 in commission, allowing him to earn £1,400, he had spent quite a bit on the Whip of Mind. All he had left was £1,445. After purchasing the Sanguine Baron inheritance, new dolls, and doll dresses, he still had £2,300 in savings. Although it seemed like a sizable amount, the subsequent ingredients were that of a sanguine viscount. It would cost at least £8,000. As for Derek, he had exchanged all his merit points that he had previously accumulated, and he was waiting to be sent out for a patrolling or exploration mission. Furs and Audrey were similarly not seeking to purchase the potion formulas of the subsequent sequences since they could obtain them from their own resource channels. Furthermore, there was no need to hide it or waste money at the Tarot Club. Audrey simply wasn't too nitpicky when it came to money. It didn't mean she was dumb. On the other hand, Katlia was still observing and wasn't in a rush to reveal what she needed. On the other hand, she didn't believe that the other Tarot Club members apart from Mr. Fool could provide anything she needed. After all, to a pirate admiral who had advanced to Sequence 5 for years, what she desired most was the level of demigod. Therefore, she only looked calmly at the sun and the others, with her slightly dark purple eyes, and without making any attempts at speaking. Klein thought for a moment and controlled the world to add, "Is anyone able to obtain a mystical item with very potent offensive strength?" The target of his question was directed at the hermit. This was because only Admiral of Stars, who had traveled the seas for so many years, could satisfy his request. Even the hanged man and that artisan he knew couldn't do it unless he could provide them with a corresponding Sequence 6 or even a Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic. Katlia fell silent for 2 seconds before slowly shaking her head. "If something similar appears at the Beyonder gatherings I participate in, I'll help you take note." All these years, she had killed several Beyonders and had indeed obtained a certain number of Beyonder characteristics and mystical items, but they were either rewarded to her pirate subordinates, or she had exchanged them for 2 powerful items that greatly enhanced her strength and survivability. She didn't have anything to spare. Furthermore, she needed the 2 items and wouldn't sell them before she advanced to the level of demigod. From the looks of it, Admiral of Stars isn't a well-to-do person either. A huge faction implies large expenses. Klein silently sighed and made the world thank her with his hoarse voice. With the transactions quickly coming to an end, he controlled the world to look at Furs. "I wish to entrust you with a mission." "Me?" Furs was a little surprised. Could it be something like buying a radio transceiver again? She thought as the corners of her mouth twitched slightly. The world nodded. "Go to William Street, which borders West Borough and Empress Borough, and circle the place. Do it once every 2 to 3 days. Take note of any abnormalities. If there are any, then inform me immediately." He didn't use Mr. Fool to bring focus on the matter, as everyone was already used to it and experienced. Furthermore, beneath William Street was precisely the location of the Tudor family's ruins where the evil spirit was lingering. Abnormality? What would be considered abnormal? Furs asked, feeling puzzled and cautious. There might be something abnormal about William Street in Backland? Audrey was originally not very interested in the topic, but at that moment, she pricked up her ears and paid close attention. She trusted Mr. World's ability to gather intelligence to a great extent. The Great Smog of Backland was evidence of his ability. West Borough, Empress Borough. Sounds like it's located at Loan's capital, Backland. Miss Magician is presently in Backland? Indeed. She looks ordinary, but she isn't in any way. To a secret organization, members in a city are often more powerful in other places. Of course, she might also be like me, a coincidence of fate because she requested to be roped in. Katlia swept a glance at Furs and quickly analyzed the information revealed from the conversation. Alger was suddenly interested since he knew that the world was the representative of Mr. Fool's Blessed. Whatever he paid attention to had a high chance of involving a conflict at the upper echelons. Just what secret lies within that street named William Street? Alger couldn't help but try to guess at the deeper truth. How would I know what abnormalities there will be? Klein mumbled before getting the world to answer gloomily, "I believe there will be sufficient abnormalities. I have to warn you that if you really notice anything abnormal, do not attempt to investigate it on your own or hire someone to do the investigation. It will be very dangerous. How much do you think is an adequate reward?" Very dangerous. Furs instinctively wished to decline the mission. However, considering how immense the influence of the Great Smog of Backland was, one that even affected her, she wasn't sure if this abnormality wouldn't cause her harm. As such, she became hesitant. After a few seconds, she changed her languid seating posture and said, 100 pounds. Much lower than I imagined. The world chuckled. Furs spread her hands and said, "It's because it's for myself as well. I'll just treat it as people observation in order to gather material for my novel. That's right, I can't stay at home all day. It's time for me to get out. I have to push forward the matter of acting as a trick master. Just conjuring tricks to amuse Zio isn't enough to digest it. How should I act? Join a circus to perform tricks? Or should I do individual performances at different squares? I don't have to be worried about how the people I know view me. As an author, life experience is a basic trait. Furza's thoughts gradually dispersed. After settling this matter, Klein made the world turn his head to the Hanged Man and chuckle darkly. I received intel that the Church of Storms has taken action. The matter at Bansi Harbor has preliminarily been resolved. Having been drifting out at sea for the past week, Alger, who hadn't had any contact with the church, immediately replied with a solemn voice, "What's the final outcome?" "There won't be a Bansi Harbor for some time," the world replied with a concealed smile. At this moment, Audrey and company realized what they were talking about. That was the place with the ancient name Binzi, and it had the present name of Bansi. It was the place where descendants of the King of Angels Medici resided. Is Mr. World implying that the Church of Storms has leveled Bansi Harbor? That's really in their style. That's good too. There's no need to worry that the innocent there will be corrupted. I wonder if the King of Angels Medici appeared or escaped. Would the Pontiff of the Church of Storms appear in person, or was a Grade 0 sealed artifact used? Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she asked with brightened eyes, "Mr. World, do you know of the specifics?" "No, no one knows, other than the upper echelons of the Church of Storms." The world stole a glance at the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man fell silent, feeling the burning ambition in his chest once more. "I want to become a member of the Church's upper echelons," he emphasized to himself. The hermit Catlia, who had joined the tarot gathering a second time, basically didn't understand what they were talking about. As a pirate admiral, she was no stranger to Bansi Harbor, but she didn't know what had happened there. She also had no idea why the Church of Storms would destroy the place and why it would require a long period of time to rebuild it. It should be a very serious matter that deals with the higher-ups. The members of the Tarot Club seems to be aware of the reason. Although their sequences aren't high, they seem to know a lot and are involved in many matters, apart from the sun. This is the reason why Mr. Fool tacitly agreed to have them establish this gathering. Through the Tarot Club, they will indirectly influence various matters of different organizations. Catlia once again re-evaluated her understanding of the other members and was increasingly impressed with them. She still maintained her silence and didn't inquire. This left Audrey, who was waiting to flaunt via answering in response to the Hermit's puzzlement, disappointed. Even for Ma'am Hermit, it's unlikely that she'll be involved in matters regarding a King of Angels. No, she might not even know about the existence of a King of Angels. Audrey thought spontaneously. After talking about the outcome of Bansi Harbor and waiting for a moment, Emlyn White immediately cleared his throat and said, "Thanks to Mr. Hanged Man's help, I'm already a baron. I have a question. As a sanguine, do I need to use the acting method like you humans do in order to expedite the so-called digestion after advancing to a baron, so as to better grasp the Beyonder characteristic?" His back was extremely sharp as his neck was slightly elevated while his chin was slightly tipped upwards. "I'm sorry. Mr. Fool isn't able to answer this question of yours. But in theory, it's required. After all, you are using the inheritance of others." Klein leaned back in his chair and sat amidst the gray fog as he leisurely looked at the other members of the Tarot Club. Catlia scanned her surroundings and said, "A sanguine baron corresponds to the Sequence 6 Potions Professor?" "Yes," Emlyn replied, unable to hide his smile. He wasn't stupid. From the previous transactions and interactions, he had determined the sequences of the other members apart from the world. He believed that he was one of the strongest members of the Tarot Club. Of course, this was excluding Mr. Fool and the recently recruited Ma'am Hermit. Mr. Moon is already at Sequence 6? Why does he seem more immature than the sun? Audrey pursed her lips. At that moment, Catlia said, "It requires acting because this pathway only has the name vampire at Sequence 7. As for you, you were born in that state. There's no need to act, but it's required for the other sequences." "Ma'am Hermit, which pathway does that Sequence 7 belong to?" Audrey blinked her eyes as she curiously asked before Emlyn White could say a word. Chapter 595. Domain. Without waiting for the hermit to answer, Audrey added, "If you believe this is an important piece of information and isn't something to be given for free, then I can provide you with some payment." "No, there's no need to. Anyone familiar with the Faina Potter's Church of Earth Mother will have some understanding of this." Catlia didn't doubt Miss Justice's sincerity when it came to the principle of equal exchange. She believed that Miss Justice was fully capable of satisfying her price in terms of wealth and resources, but she decided to provide the information for free. Firstly, it raised Miss Justice's impression on her and would build a foundation for any future transactions. Secondly, by providing the information, she could observe the reactions of the members and estimate their standing in their own organizations and factions. I'm very familiar with the Earth Mother's Blessed, Bishop Utravsky, but I didn't know anything about that. Of course, I truly am a little scared of him. His height and build are just too intimidating. Every time I'm there, I only seek out Emlyn White. Sitting at the end of the long bronze table, Klein thought in a self-deprecating manner. Catlia didn't pause as she continued, Vampire is from the Moon Pathway. The corresponding Sequence 9 is Apothecary, Sequence 8 is Beast Tamer, Sequence 6 is Potions Professor, Sequence 5 is Scarlet Scholar, Sequence 4 is Shaman King. I'm not sure about the higher sequences. Ahem. Emlyn White coughed. Ma'am Hermit, I have to emphasize that it's sanguine, not vampire. Ha, I won't object it if you call those humans who consume the characteristics of my kinsman vampires. I would even be very agreeable to it. So vampire is from the apothecary pathway. So is Shaman King. It's no wonder they revere the primordial moon and not the goddess. Could the scarlet lunar corona that Ma'am Sharon obtained be from a dead scarlet scholar or sanguine viscount? Apart from being able to recreate the effects of a full moon and neutralizing the corresponding effects, it can provide terrifying speed, unimaginable recovery speed, and rather powerful darkness-related spells. The negative effects can be neutralized by drinking the fresh blood of the living. Indeed, it does seem to be a result of a sanguine. Among the various jobs of this pathway, there are some that resemble the seer pathway. There's no connection between the sequences, while there are some that have an obvious progression. How strange. Klein joined the bits of breadcrumbs together, feeling somewhat enlightened and puzzled. Alger, Furs, and company were either in thought, listening in relish, or pretending to be disinterested. Everyone had different reactions, but Catlia was able to figure out that they didn't understand much about vampires prior to this. They are low or mid-ranking members in their organizations or factions. They match the characteristics of being recently pulled into the Tarot Club and at the stage of rapidly advancing. The world didn't react. Either he's very staid, or he long knew of the matter regarding vampires, or both. After repeated observations, I have to admit that the world is the Tarot Club member that needs to have the most attention paid to and be guarded against. Audrey listened with great interest as she thought over it carefully. As though she was attending a family education class, she raised her hand slightly. Ma'am Hermit, why are the sequences in the moon pathway seemingly unrelated? The Hermit Catlia looked at Miss Justice and discovered that the dress and accessories she wore were completely different from the last gathering. There was no repeat, but it exuded her luxurious and noble bearing. As her mind went adrift, she seemed to see the portrait of the queen back when she was young. Every piece of clothing she wore was completely different. The same set of clothing was never worn a second time at a formal event. After a moment of silence, Catlia said, a pathway's sequence doesn't necessarily need to be related or superficially connected. The common trait is that this pathway corresponds to the god's domain. For example, the moon represents spirituality, plants, beauty, parts of life, parts of darkness, and parts of mystery. Therefore, this pathway has apothecary of the plant domain, vampire of the life domain, and beast tamer of the intersection of life and spirituality. Sanguine. Emlyn White emphasized and lifted his chin slightly. This should be why us sanguine are very handsome and beautiful. No, that's not the case. The vampires I've seen are all disgusting and ferocious. Derek retorted weakly in his heart. It can be explained in such a manner? It's quite different from Captain's and Daly's explanations. Different pathways represent the domain possessed by a sequence 0. Or could it be that the two combined is the most accurate answer? I wonder what the domains the sequence 0 of the seer pathway represents. From the symbol behind my chair, it represents strangeness and change? Klein's expression didn't change as his mind whirled. Audrey easily understood Ma'am Hermit's explanation and couldn't help but guess the name of her pathway's sequence 0. It's definitely dragon. There are many species of dragons. Many powers are not contained within this pathway. It's closer to the domain represented by the mind dragon. I wish Mr. Fool can quickly find the card of blasphemy of this corresponding pathway. That Grozel's travels originates from dragons. I wonder if it has anything to do with a mind dragon. At this moment, Emlyn asked as a form of validation, that is to say that to successfully become a sanguine viscount, I similarly have to act as a potions professor, even if I'm a favorite of the moon. My dear Emlyn, I know you are trying to bring attention to the latter half of your sentence. Klein nearly reached out his right hand to pinch his chin. This was also one of the reasons why he had entrusted Miss Magician to check for abnormalities in William Street. He ultimately felt that Emlyn White, a vampire who didn't enjoy going out or socializing, was rather unreliable at present. Another reason was that he knew that he was being controlled by the Sanguine's upper echelons in secret. Getting him to head to William Street made it easy to expose the matter regarding the underground ruins. Yes. Katlia nodded. The exchange continued, and as it came to a close, Audrey seemed to recall something. She turned her body and looked towards the end of the long bronze table. Mr. Fool, the second round of the Civil Servant Unified Examination officially ends today. What's left is the final interview. Her tone was brisk and with clear, delightful emotions. It was like an excellent student reporting her results to her parents. From her point of view, the Civil Servant Unified Examination was a suggestion raised by Mr. Fool in passing. She had pushed forward the idea via inconspicuous methods, the first time she had attempted to use her beyonder powers to change reality. Therefore, she had always paid great attention to it, often reporting the situation to the suggester. The second round of the examinations are over? I wonder if Benson can pass and have the opportunity of entering the final interview. Klein leaned back and suddenly felt wistful. He nodded slightly and said with a smiling tone, "Not bad." Audrey, who had been praised by Mr. Fool, became happier. She felt that she was indirectly changing the fates of many people, allowing people who were stuck in the lower and middle classes to have a chance at entering the middle and upper classes. When Katlia heard this exchange, she couldn't help but frown. She felt that this was very different from the style the Tarot Club had previously shown. Could it be that the reforms of the past half a year in the Lone Kingdom were a result of the Tarot Club's turning of the wheels? As a young noble lady, Miss Justice played an important role? If that's the case, I have to reevaluate my views. Although the members aren't of a high sequence and are low-ranking members of their organizations, they're still able to influence the situation of the world to a certain extent. Katlia retracted her gaze and considered whether she wanted to use her different resource channels to figure out the backstory of Lone Kingdom's reforms. After a few minutes of exchanges, the Fool Klein announced the end of the gathering. While Miss Justice and company got up to express their farewells, he severed the connection and leaned back into his seat. He silently watched the endless grayish-white fog around him for a very long while. Backlund. In a coffee shop next to King's Avenue. Melissa was holding a porcelain teaspoon as she gently stirred the black tea which had a lemon in it. From time to time, she would turn her head to look out into the faint fog. Her black veiled hat was sitting beside her. Placed in front of her was a plate of the cheapest toast, but she hadn't taken a single bite. She originally imagined that she would anger the coffee shop's owner for sitting there all this while, preventing him from earning more. But she later discovered that there were many people waiting for the end of the test opposite the road like her. As seconds turned into minutes, the water condensing on the glass windows grew thicker. Melissa couldn't help but extend her hand to clean up a relatively clear spot. Finally, she saw a bunch of people surge out of the test venue. The glass-inlaid wooden door of the coffee shop was pushed open as about 8 men and women entered. Just as Benson took off his rather old top and before he could smooth his rather high hairline with his fingers, he discovered his sister standing as she asked nervously, "How did you do? Were the questions tough today?" It might have been considered difficult for others, but it was a piece of cake for me. Mathematics is my forte. Benson looked around and saw everyone discussing it without noticing him. Hence, he chuckled. After the test ended, I saw quite a number of people with blank sheets. Do they think a low-ranking civil servant will have a mathematics secretary? If that's the case, what's the difference between hiring a curly-haired baboon and them? Melissa heaved a secret sigh of relief and looked to her side before turning her head back. Benson, if you're really confident, you should consider the matter regarding the interview. You need to buy a new decent set of clothes. Let's leave that to tomorrow. We should celebrate today. I've already decided on the restaurant. Benson smiled as he pointed outside. Melissa pursed her lips and looked at her elder brother in an extremely serious manner. I've already bought the meat and vegetables. Benson locked his gaze with his sister for a few seconds before moving it away in submission. All right, let's go home. Above the gray fog, Klein gradually found his train of thought and calmed his emotions. He began considering how to separate the true creator's mental corruption of the all-black eye. Chapter 596, Clue in the majestic palace with stone columns propping it up. Klein sat in a high-back chair as he lightly tapped the corner of the long modeled table. He first eliminated the method of seeking a sequence 4 unshadowed from the sun pathway. This was because he had almost zero contact with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. It was very difficult for him to find help from anyone. Secondly, he suspected that an unshadowed was unlikely to be capable of cleansing the mental corruption in the all-black eye. After all, the hermit Catlia's suggestion was directed at remnant influences by an ordinary rampager, and not the true creator. Seeking the help of an angel or true God's power isn't realistic either. In theory, I can use the mysterious space above the gray fog to perform a divination on the eternal blazing sun and use his help to shatter the all-black eye and evaporate the mental corruption. But the problem lies with the fact that an experienced him might be able to use this opportunity to invade this place and take over the gray fog. If that happens, it wouldn't be worth it. And when a power that exceeds my level an unknown number of times instantly comes into effect, there's no delay. It targets me, and I'll have no time to redirect it to the all-black eye. I will lack the ability to control the situation. Also, it's not like I can divine it as I wish. I need a medium. I previously used the mutated sun's sacred emblem, which had the eternal blazing sun's divine blood in it, as well as the ear that was corrupted by the true creator. Currently, the mediums I have are Mr. Door and the Hidden Sage. I can use the ravings that Miss Magician hears during the full moon, as well as Knowledge's pursuit of Admiral of Stars to make an attempt. But similarly, the counterattack isn't directed at the all-black eye, and I don't have the means to divert the attack. Mr. Azik has yet to recover. Snake of Fate Will Osepton has yet to be born. From the looks of it, I can't find an angel to help me either. Sigh, I still know too few high-ranking figures. Right, there's also something akin to an angel, the evil spirit in the ruins under Backlund that's suspected to be king of Angels Medici. But that fellow is scheming with unknown plots and malicious intent. Unless there's no other method, I will not consider it. Yes, taking the risk isn't worth it at all. If that's the case, I might as well give up on the all-black eye and search for the main ingredients of a Nimblewright master. It's only the dust of ancient wraiths and the core crystal of a 6-winged gargoyle. It's even possible that the former can be found in the underworld. In that case, performing a new search is a viable choice, while finding a mystical item that's similar to the blood vessel thief is another choice. With the gray fog shielding me, I can use its theft abilities to its full extent. I'll definitely be able to separate the true creator's mental corruption from the all-black eye, and I wouldn't be afraid that it would return. The easiest method is to throw the corrupted mystical item far away once the theft is completed. Then I'll bring the pure all-black eye back to the real world, causing the physical separation of the two items. How am I to find a similar mystical item? Mr. Hanged Man didn't say anything after seeing the methods, which implies that he doesn't know either. However, I can ask at the next tarot gathering. Ma'am Hermit, Miss Magician, Miss Justice, Little Sun, and Emlyn White all have their corresponding information and resource channels. I can try searching for it myself this week. I'll start with Vice Admiral Iceberg. Her third mate, Flowery Bowtie Jodson, has beyonder powers that can steal. Perhaps he might know where there might be similar mystical items. Klein's thought process gradually cleared up as he formulated an initial plan. He first performed a divination before rapidly returning to the real world. He got out of the decadent state of laying slump in the reclining chair, drinking beverages and reading newspapers as he quickly set up a ritual. It was still 3 candles, but the difference was the symbol he drew. It was the sacred emblem of the god of knowledge and wisdom, an omniscient eye on an open book. The ritual's silver dagger also switched to a brass knife. In mysticism, the blue star corresponded to the god of knowledge and wisdom, and the metal that belonged to the blue star's domain was mercury and brass. Klein had long considered the problem of contacting Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards. Therefore, he prepared a set of soulfall ritual materials. After a series of processes, he burned the corresponding herb powder, and he dripped the extract and essence from lavender and mint. Amidst the faint, clear, and mysterious fragrance, Klein took a step back and used ancient Hermes to recite an incantation. I pray for the power of knowledge. I pray for the power of rationality. I pray for the God of wisdom's loving grace. I pray that you allow me to communicate with the spirit of Edwina Edwards, the teacher who pursues knowledge, the researcher of spirit world creatures, Vice Admiral Iceberg of the Seas, who hails from Lemberg. Klein's voice reverberated as the altar instantly turned gloomy and cold. Be it the brass knife or the metallic bottles, all of them floated up. It succeeded. The Golden Dream is still within 500 nautical miles. Klein first felt a sense of delight before he saw the flames of the 3 candles lengthen. They were tainted with a pale white with a hint of dark green. He knew that the soulfall ritual was essentially to free his body and allow the target's astral projection to possess him to establish an effective communication channel. He would be lacking in the necessary protection, making it easy to be attacked by the target of the soulfall ritual. Therefore, he had divined ahead of time to determine the danger from this matter. Besides, after meeting and conversing with her, he believed that Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina wasn't a person with malicious intent. He temporarily found her trustworthy. At this moment, the wind within the wall of spirituality produced mournful sounds. Klein only felt an ice-cold power descend upon him from the void in an attempt to enter his body. Then, he was surprised to discover that it wasn't like he expected. He had the necessary strength to resist and control himself instead of being possessed by her. What's happening? Just as he had the thought, he began to see a faint, formless gray fog around him. This was a trait he possessed after advancing to faceless. The power of the gray fog was able to slightly leak into reality. Amidst his racing mind, Klein didn't hesitate to wave his arm. He pointed to a coat hanging on a coat rack, throwing the ice-cold power onto it. The black tweed coat on the coat rack strangely floated up as the arms raised up, looking somewhat clumsy. It was as though an invisible person was wearing his coat. The black coat floated 2 meters forward before coming to a pause. The 2 sleeves raised up and formed in times. What does that mean? Klein was taken aback before he realized what Vice Admiral Iceberg meant. Without a mouth, I can't speak. Without hands, I can't write. This is awkward. Klein thought for a moment and directly said, I need a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others. Ma'am, might I know if you have one? If you don't, can you ask your third mate for me? Flowery Bowtie Jodson? The corresponding answer can be written in a letter. Summon my messenger to send it over. The black coat's sleeves spread out and motioned with a lowering gesture. Following that, it lost its soul and fell to the ground, no longer appearing as straight as before. That means yes. Klein sighed silently and quickly ended the ritual. He hung up the black coat and used a brush and handkerchief to clean it. Then he wrote a letter and asked Mr. Azek a similar question. He summoned the messenger by blowing the copper whistle. After the letter was taken away, Klein attempted the third method with great drive. He took out the paper crane from his wallet and carefully spread it out. He wrote with a pencil on it, Might I ask where I can get a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others? Putting down the pencil, Klein restored the paper crane according to its lines. He was quite pleased with his improvement at handicraft. In the evening, after Klein browsed through the prayers of his believers, he returned to the real world and went to the washroom to enjoy a rather comfortable hot bath. This allowed him to quickly fall asleep after entering his bed. This continued until he suddenly sensed an external force invading his dream. It was the same desolate plains with the towering pitch-black steeple. With familiarity, Klein passed through the doors and walls until he entered deep inside the tower. There was still a deck of tarot cards scattered here. They surrounded a central protrusion as though they were making a declaration. However, as a seer, Klein could only interpret it as chaotic and contradictory. On the protruded area, the text had already changed. The silver words formed 3 sentences. The first line wrote, "I'm only a child that has yet to been born." Klein's expression froze as though he was hearing an infant cry, "Please, I beg you, don't make things difficult for me." Such communication is very tiring. The second line was equally succinct. "The clue lies in you." The third line was, "Don't ask me what the clue is because I have no idea either." That is to say that Snake of Fate Will Auseptin can foresee a clue on me, but he is unable to foresee what it is exactly. That feels like a charlatan's divination. No, I can't say so. I can't include myself in such criticism. Klein remembered the information and exited the dream before returning back to sleep until daybreak. After breakfast, he began recalling the items and matters he had experienced before to seek out the so-called clue. At this moment, his spiritual perception was triggered as he quickly activated his spirit vision. The skeleton messenger remained huge, but unlike the last time, its head didn't pass through the ceiling. This was because it had spewed up from the floor, so half its head was in the level below. In such a situation, it looked at Klein at his eye level and placed the return letter on his palm. Seeing the messenger crumble like a falling waterfall, Klein was taken back. He muttered, feeling both angry and amused, "So you do know some manners. You're getting more considerate after all. You've changed greatly after knowing that you wouldn't be transferred to me." Klein rapidly retracted his gaze and opened the letter to read Mr. Azek's reply. Stealing the beyonder powers of others is from the Marauder pathway. In the 4th epoch, it belonged to the Aman family, the Zoroast family, and the Jacob family. They seldom appeared after the War of the 4 Emperors. Rumor has it that some of their members have formed an alliance and call themselves Hermits of Fate. I can't remember any further. You can try attacking from the angle of the descendants of these 3 families. So a blasphemer refers to this pathway? The Jacob family was one of the 5 angel families of the Tudor dynasty. It was equal to Abraham, Amun, Antigonus, and Tamara. As for the Zoroast family, it's from the Solomon Empire. Hermits of Fate. The clue lies in me. Klein suddenly sat up and recalled an item. It was the mysterious badge from Lenivis. The symbols on it were none other than that of fate and concealment. Chapter 597. Klein's plan. Lenivis is likely a Sequence 8 swindler. This happens to be from the Marauder pathway. It's not incomprehensible or unacceptable that he would have the admission ticket to the corresponding gathering. On the contrary, it's very logical. Purchasing a mystical item, which can steal the beyonder powers of others, at a gathering with the Hermits of Fate is definitely much easier than other circles. From the looks of it, this is the so-called clue Will Auseptin mentioned. Klein sat by the edge of the bed and suddenly brightened up. He hurriedly set up a ritual to summon himself and went above the gray fog to bring back the eyeball-sized badge to the real world. On the front of the badge was a symbol that depicted fate and concealment, and behind it was a ring of tiny and compact words in ancient Hermes. You can join if you have this item. Klein was just about to inject his spirituality to activate the badge and send out the information to synchronize it with the latest gathering time and location when he suddenly turned hesitant. How careless am I? I actually forgot to divine if doing so will be dangerous. If that gathering has Lenivis's demigod senior and he uses it to lock onto me, that will be troublesome. It's just like how Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy was able to quickly find a demoness of unaging to help her. I must take precautions. A person should be rash when the time calls for it, and be a coward when necessary. Klein smacked his forehead and cautiously returned to the mysterious space above the gray fog where he used spirit dowsing to perform a divination. After receiving a revelation that there wasn't any danger, he breathed a sigh of relief and left the gray fog. He then sat in the reclining chair in his inn room. With the injection of his spirituality, the badge emitted a blurry luster and quickly condensed into an inconspicuous light beam, shooting out into the air. Before long, the same light beam returned and dispersed, transforming into a palm-sized piece of illusory goatskin parchment. On it was written the words in ancient Fasak, June 6, 1350, 9 p.m., at the Tussock River's estuary. That's another 4 more months. With this much time, it wouldn't be a problem for me to find the Nimblewright Master's main ingredient all over again. The only obstacle is a lack of money, but that's not too difficult. I now have a wealth of £6,945. I should have more than enough after selling another 1 or 2 Beyonder characteristics. Besides, there are so many moving bounties at sea. No, I can't be so conceited. I have to eliminate the 4 kings and the 7 admirals. What kind of clue is this? Klein leaned forward, arched his back, and began thinking hard. As he thought about the gathering of the Hermits of Fate, he suddenly thought of someone, Leonard Mitchell. My dear poet had participated in the Hermits of Fate gathering in Bobber Valley. Regardless of his goal, whether it's for official work or private matters, there's a possibility of him obtaining a mystical item that can steal the Beyonder powers of others. I can borrow it from him or buy it through him. This is the real clue? Klein felt energized as he quickly came up with a rough plan. First step, place the radio transceiver above the gray fog to accumulate its aura. Second step, use the radio transceiver to contact Rhodes a few days later. Third step, ask it where I can, with relative ease, obtain mystical items that can steal the Beyonder powers of others. If the answer is very clear, the fourth step will follow what the information says, easily completing my goal. If the answer is vague or fraught with danger, the fourth step can be to ask my dear poet's present location. The fifth step is to get Emlyn White to take this badge to find my dear poet to see if he has any corresponding items and if it's possible to do a transaction. I won't appear in person, for I might end up being recognized. That will similarly make it very troublesome. As for Emlyn, he's presently considered someone from the Church of Earth Mother, no, considered a ghost of the Church of Earth Mother. To get him to initiate first contact, even if he were reported by my dear poet or ends up captured on the spot, he wouldn't be framed or put up for torture. With a plan on what to do and how to proceed, Klein immediately felt refreshed. In his good mood, he decided to head out to eat a Byam delicacy, roasted fish. Above the blue sea, the Golden Dream, which was sparkling thanks to the setting sun's golden rays, was silently cruising forward. Receiving his captain's permission, Danitz apprehensively walked into her room with his head up as people stared at him with envy. Bookshelves filled the room and on top of them were different books. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina stood in front of a desk as she held a black fountain pen in her hand. She quickly wrote the following. I do not have similar items. Same for Jodson. He says he will help you look out for it, but that will require you to be sufficiently lucky. Edwina raised her head and turned her clear, aqueous blue eyes to look at Danitz. You hold the ritual to summon Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. At that moment, Danitz was wondering if he would receive any special treatment from his captain, but when he heard that, he pointed at himself in astonishment. Me? Yes. Edwina folded the letter, straightened her body, and nodded. This can help you familiarize yourself with similar rituals. In the future, I'll be testing you on this. All right. Danitz hid his disappointment as he tried his best to recall the procedure as he slowly set up the ritual that only needed 1 candle. Finally, under Edwina's watch, he took out a shiny lone gold coin and placed it on the altar. After taking the letter, Danitz ran through the subsequent ritual in his mind twice before he dared to do it. He took a step back and said in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gehrman Sparrow. The wind howled in the wall of spirituality, sending Danet's yellow hair flailing upwards. The flame rapidly burgeoned to the size of a human's head. It was as pale as the letter in Danet's hand. Soon, Danet saw long blonde hair, bloodshot eyes, and a gorgeous head appear. Gehrman Sparrow's messenger is very unique. How can a spirit world creature look like a human, and it's so beautiful at that? She's just slightly inferior to Captain. Danet suddenly choked because he discovered that the head didn't have a neck underneath. Furthermore, it was held up by a pigtail with a hand. He looked in a daze as one head after another appeared. He saw the headless figure dressed in a complicated dress appear before him. She's indeed a creature from the spirit world. He felt ashamed for having those thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Danet hurriedly handed over the letter and saw one of the beautiful heads open its mouth to bite at it with pearly white teeth. At this moment, Rionette Tinker's other head bit on the gold coin on the altar. However, she didn't immediately leave. The 4 bloodshot eyes on other 2 heads darted towards Edwina Edwards, who was outside the wall of spirituality. She sized her up a few times. Edwina felt herself being observed, and it made it impossible to contain the horror that ensued. Rionette Tinker retracted her gaze as her body turned illusory, fusing into the white candlelight. The flame lit up again as the colors spread outwards. Everything had restored to normal. Just as Danet removed the wall of spirituality, he heard his captain say in a deep voice, "That's not an ordinary creature from the spirit world." Not an ordinary creature from the spirit world? Danet was stunned. He knew that his captain's profession was a researcher of spirit world creatures. If she said it wasn't ordinary, it definitely wasn't one. It was far more extraordinary than ordinary. Gehrman Sparrow really is a man with many secrets. Danet reflected. Backlund Sherwood Burrow. Furs mustered every fiber in her body before she triumphed over the laziness brought from the fireplace. She switched to a thick dark blue cotton dress, wrapped a light gray scarf around her, and wore a warm lady's hat. In the not-too-cold temperatures, aside from the cold that seeped into her bones thanks to the prevailing fog, she took a carriage to William Street. She took in the cold air and told herself that this was a common excursion for an author to gather material outside. There was no need for her to be nervous or appear abnormal. Taking a few steps forward, Furs entered a coffee shop and sat by the window. As she drank the thick, warm liquid, she observed the pedestrians and the houses across the road. There's nothing abnormal. There's no fighting or theft at all. This is a place where the rich live, so the security is much better than East Borough. I can still see someone from Fasak. He's really tall and muscular, like a bear. He also has companions. Are those people from Intis? They really wear exaggerated clothes. It's like they're acting in a play. Backlund is indeed the capital of capitals. I can meet many foreigners here. Furs gradually forgot her goal and opened up a notebook to record down material for her novel. After she finished her coffee, she circled the street and left after finding nothing peculiar. She planned to come again on Thursday. After taking Edwina's reply letter from Rionette Tinker's hands, Klein watched as the messenger vanished, confirming that she hadn't asked for an additional gold coin. From the looks of it, using a gold coin as a ritual material works? He smiled, feeling pleased with himself as he opened the letter. With a fruitless answer, he planned on going out to walk the streets to find a chance to engage in true acting so as to conclude the principles. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. It was Captain Elland. Klein silently opened the door and said, "I was just about to look for you." Elland chuckled and said, "There's no need. As long as you register a place with your identity, I'll be able to know where you're staying. The Governor General's office and the military have quite good control on the inns after all." Klein nodded without a word. Elland turned his body halfway and pointed at the corridor. "I'll bring you to see someone. The White Agate is about to return to Pritz Harbor. If you need help or have any information to provide, you can find him. We're often generous when it comes to payment." This was what Klein had previously mentioned to him before. "All right." Klein reached out to the coat rack. After wearing his coat, Elland led him straight to the Amiris Leaf Bar and to a corner inside. In the basement of the Amiris Leaf Bar, Worm-tongue Mither King looked at strongman Oziel opposite him and asked, "Have you gathered the recent intel about blazing Danets?" "Yes," Oziel said with a smile. "Last week, Blue Eyes Meath saw blazing Danets with an unknown adventurer." Chapter 598. Windfall in a corner of the Emiris Leaf Bar. Eland found a man wearing a coffee-colored jacket, patted him on the shoulder, and laughed. "Why aren't you drinking Lanty-proof?" The man was in his 30s, having a rather common face. It was obvious that he had lone blood running through his veins. He had brown hair and eyes, with a somewhat high nose bridge. His tipsy appearance instantly vanished as his eyes turned sharp. He swept a glance at Eland and Klein before his eyes turned turbid again. He said, sounding completely intoxicated, "I've already drunk. I'm drinking Zarhar to lessen the effects of the alcohol." Zarhar was a locally produced malt beer. It was cheap and tasted quite good. Eland chuckled and pointed at Klein. "Gehrman Sparrow." Then he introduced the man to Klein, "Oz Kent. You can call him Kent. Chat amongst yourselves. I'll have to return to make preparations. I'll be setting off early, tomorrow morning." He waved his hand and left without any hesitation. Klein pulled over a nearby chair and sat down. He didn't get any alcohol as he expressionlessly looked at us Kent. The staring made Kent feel extremely uncomfortable as he downed a mouthful of Zarhar and said, "Find me if there's anything in the future. You'll be paid as long as you provide any intel of value, or if you help us do certain things." He wasn't worried that the drunkards around them would hear their conversation, as many gangs and pirate crews would say the same thing. The words used to rope in informants were usually the same. "All right." Klein had the strong urge to ask if he could be reimbursed for dressing up as Helene to assassinate Vice Admiral Ailment despite it being paid by Danets. However, it was just a thought. Oz Kent chuckled while appearing completely drunk. "I heard Elan mention some things about you, but I have to remind you that one shouldn't be too crazy out at sea. You need to take note and try your best not to provoke the pirates. What I mean is to not fight them head-on. Privately providing us information would be fine. We will keep it a secret for you." This time, he had clearly suppressed his voice. Seeing no response from Gehrman Sparrow, he added, "Pirates wouldn't bother with any chivalrous code, nor will they abide by the kingdom's laws and rules. If you have a family at different port cities or some island colony, they'd definitely be capable of attacking your family." Klein fell silent for a second before calmly saying, "I do not have a family." Oz Kent was nearly at a loss for words. All he could do was say, "They will also attack your friends." Then he heard Gehrman Sparrow reply in an unperturbed tone, "I do not have friends." Oz Kent instantly choked up. He subconsciously drank a mouthful of Zarhar beer to calm himself. After coughing twice, he said in a deep voice, "They will also ambush you. They will also bribe people to learn about your schedule and intercept your ship. At sea, a single person's strength is often so inconsequential." Klein said rather calmly, "I wouldn't reject them from giving me money. That's basic courtesy." Giving money? Oz Kent was clearly taken aback as he found Gehrman Sparrow's words incomprehensible. A few seconds later, he realized that the man was treating pirates as mobile bounties. He drank mouthful after mouthful of beer, momentarily at a loss for words. In the basement of the Emiris Leaf Bar. An unknown adventurer? Worm-tongue Mither King's mind stirred as he sat straight up. Strongman Oziel nodded. According to Blue Eyes Meath, that adventurer is new. He likely hasn't been to the archipelago for long, but Meath felt that he was considerably dangerous. Considerably dangerous? Could he be the person who killed Steel Mavedi and company with blazing Danets? Could it be the person who disguised himself as Helene to attack Captain? Mither immediately made certain connections as he asked with a deep voice, "Do you have his photograph or a portrait?" Oziel beckoned to a subordinate and received a piece of white paper. "We used a ritual to get Blue Eyes Meath to draw the unknown adventurer's appearance. As you know, it's different having a firm footing in Biam's underground world than being a successful pirate. I need supporting members. To hire them, I spent quite a bit of money." Mither could read between the lines as he chuckled. As long as you get to the bottom of this matter, Captain wouldn't be stingy with her reward. He took the portrait, spread it out, and discovered a cold-looking man with black hair and brown eyes. His face was slightly thin, and he had a cut face. He wore a black double-breasted frock coat and a half-top hat. Never seen him before. It's impossible to confirm if he's the person who disguised himself as Helene. Mither raised his head and said, "Find out his identity and whereabouts." "I've already instructed my men to do it," Strongman Oziel said with a deep laugh. The two fell silent at the same time as they drank their Southville red wine. A few minutes later, a bar bouncer entered and broke the silence. He glanced at Worm-Tongue Mither, leaned in towards his boss's ear, and whispered. Oziel's expression instantly turned odd as an unconcealed smile appeared. He put down the wine glass and said after pausing, "That unknown adventurer has been found." "Where is he?" Mither asked. Oziel pointed upstairs. "At this very bar." Mither looked up at the ceiling and remained silent for a few seconds. "I'll go up to verify." He believed that having had some interaction with the disguised Helene, he had a general understanding of the man's abilities. He believed that no matter how good the man was at disguising himself, he would definitely feel a sense of familiarity. Therefore, he decided to confirm it himself. According to his usual habits, he wouldn't have taken such initiative and would instead perform an investigation from the outskirts. Only with enough confidence would he get himself involved. But this time, he wasn't too convinced of Oziel's subordinate. If it was really the person who disguised himself as Helene, he would immediately change his appearance and identity and vanish once he noticed something was amiss. Besides, Mither knew that he was presently being punished by his captain. He had to quickly perform a deed of merit in order to return to the Black Death. Sigh, regardless if I was lacking in ability or not being careful enough, the outcome cannot be changed. I was fooled by that disguise and brought her onto the Black Death, nearly killing Captain. If it were Kalangos, he wouldn't have spared me. He has always been very greedy. He had long thirsted for my beyonder powers. Captain didn't believe that I had been in cahoots with the assassin simply because Kalangos could also change his appearance with creeping hunger. She didn't summon people to surround and kill me. She only sent me to Byam to investigate this matter. She's already being forgiving enough. Compared to Kalangos, she is truly a captain worthy of being loyal to. I have to quickly provide some meritorious service and find an excuse to contact her, so as to live up to her treatment towards me. As Mither King got up and walked out, he couldn't help but have these thoughts churn through his mind. Although he was a pirate who had killed countless and had plundered countless ships, he had a soft spot in his heart. Besides, he didn't notice that he was being constantly mesmerized by Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy via prolonged interactions with her. His fondness for her had seeped deep into his bones. Even if Ailment Maiden didn't have helpers, he wouldn't have resisted, kneeling down and kissing her toes at her behest. Of course, this didn't affect his fantasies of doing countless deeds with Tracy. If he had the chance, he believed he would take the initiative to do so even if he didn't get her permission. As a pirate, he had done such things plenty of times. When he went upstairs, Mither King followed the guidance of Oziel's subordinates and circled halfway around the bar's walls. From afar, he saw the unknown adventurer sitting in the corner. Identical to the portrait, but I don't feel any familiarity. Is it because his disguise is sufficiently good, or is he someone else, for example, Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina? She can mimic the beyonder powers of those she had seen before. It's not impossible for her to change appearance like Kalangos. Mither's gaze paused for 2 seconds before he cautiously retracted it. But at this moment, Klein's spiritual intuition as a seer told him that someone was observing him. Without concealing anything, Klein immediately turned to look back. He saw a man with short eyebrows, deep eye sockets, and bronze eyes. Worm-Tongue Mither, third mate of Vice Admiral Ailment's flagship, Black Death. Klein instantly recognized the person observing him. Instantly, 2 thoughts flashed in his mind. One of them was, 5,400-pound bounty. The other was, why is he observing me? He managed to find me by investigating Danitz? The military contact person, Kent, discovered Gehrman Sparrow's abnormality as he traced his gaze. However, due to his angle, he was blocked by a few drunkards. At this point in time, Klein already instinctively came up with a solution. It was to pretend that he didn't recognize Mr. King, retract his gaze, and get a cup of alcohol to drink. He could then secretly observe where he went, and then use his powers as a faceless to infiltrate where Mither hid himself before silently hunting him. As this thought flashed past his mind, Klein suddenly discovered a problem. That's me being myself. But I'm now Gehrman Sparrow, a seemingly calm but crazy adventurer. With this thought, he suddenly turned around, drew his revolver, and aimed at Worm-Tongue Mither King inside the rowdy bar. Bang! A gunshot rang through the bar as many customers reflexively crouched down while hugging their heads. All of them were extremely experienced. Many drunkards slumped to the ground, with more than 10 people throwing themselves to the side or rolling on the ground to dodge. These series of actions were well practiced. And Mither King was one of them. However, Klein didn't really pull the trigger, as he was afraid of injuring the innocent bystanders by mistake. There were many customers in between him and Mither. The gunshot stemmed from his powers of illusion creation. At that moment, everything before him opened up as people crouched down. Hence, having aimed at Mither, who had thrown himself sideways to the ground, he pulled the trigger this time. Bang! Chapter 599. Dragon Might Bang. The brass bullet traversed past half the bar, flying straight for Worm-Tongue Mither King's body. But just as it was about to hit him, Mither's brown eyes suddenly turned dark. The bullet made a turn, and its trajectory was thrown upwards slightly as it accurately hit a glass cup filled with golden beer. Amidst a loud noise, the glass instantly shattered, splashing beer everywhere. At the same time, Mither grabbed a cup from a customer, extended his arm, and threw it at Klein. What's the point of that? Klein only dodged slightly to allow the glass cup to miss him, shattering onto the wall. At this moment, Worm-Tongue Mither immediately lunged forward and rolled, heading for the entrance to the basement. He attempted entry in order to get help or escape via a secret path. He had initially confirmed that the unknown and crazy adventurer was the assassin, who had disguised as Helene and boarded the Black Death, targeting Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. Furthermore, his series of actions, which had nearly succeeded, told him that in a one-on-one situation, he wasn't a match for him. This was a powerhouse at the Pirate Admiral level. Klein quickly chased after Worm-Tongue Mither. He was fast and agile. Despite being inside the chaotic bar, he didn't step onto anyone. Seeing that the bouncers in the basement were coming with revolvers in hand and how Mither King was about to enter the basement with bouncers in the bar approaching, Klein didn't hesitate. He suddenly clenched his left hand. The black glove was instantly covered with dense dark golden scales. His dark brown irises turned pale and became vertical. Right on the heels of that, an invisible wave surged outwards with him as its epicenter. In the areas where the wave passed, the customers who were holding their heads down turned limp or trembled. The military contact, Oz Kent, also clearly lost his sense of reason, as though he had encountered the most terrifying thing in the world. All he wanted to do was to escape. The bouncers who had approached were no different. Extreme horror gripped their hearts as they ran around aimlessly, making the situation turn even more chaotic. Clang, clang, clang. The bouncers in the basement threw away their weapons, either running to a corner and shrinking into a ball, or they were trembling on the spot, their crotches rapidly turning moist. Worm-Tongue Mither felt as though he was struck by lightning. In his fear, he began running in circles at the entrance. This was a psychiatrist's also known as Dragon's Might or Mass Chaos. This was Klein's only crowd control beyond her power. At this moment, Klein's rapidly approaching figure didn't stop. In a few steps, he had arrived beside Mither. In that instant, a scene suddenly surfaced in his mind. Mither, who looked to be lost in extreme horror, suddenly raised his head and swung his right fist over, aiming straight for Klein's head. Without any thought, Klein fully trusted his clown's intuition for danger. He immediately bent down and turned his body sideways. Almost at the same time, Worm-Tongue Mither suddenly raised his head. His brown eyes were dark and clear, without any sense of muddle-headedness. At some moment in time, he had shaken off the effects of Dragon's might. This was something that exceeded Klein's expectations. Bang! Mithur's muscles bulged as he bent his back and threw a punch that resembled a cannonball. However, he didn't hit his expected target and instead hit the wall of the entrance. The spot where his fist connected threw up pulverized bricks. Quickly, a huge hole that seemed to be covered in a spiderweb appeared. The entire bar seemed to shake. The power of the punch was far stronger than a revolver's bullet. But at this moment, Klein had already flashed behind him. His body straightened up again as his glove seemed to be covered in a layer of gold. His brown eyes lit up with two flashes of lightning as they shot out like bullets. Interrogator's psychic piercing. Ah! Mithur King let out a shrill cry, but he didn't fall to the ground. He rolled as he grimaced in pain, holding his arms to protect his head. He soon magically recovered from the pain of psychic piercing, but he felt ice-cold metal at his forehead. He saw the cold and thin adventurer pull the trigger. At such a close distance, even though psychic piercing's effects could only be maintained for a second, it was enough for Klein to raise his right arm and place the revolver's barrel at Worm-Tongue Mithur King's head. Bang! Mithur King's pleas shrank back from his half-agape mouth and into his throat as a picture seemingly formed of blood and white material appeared on the wall behind him. It was melancholic, fresh, and messy. The luster in his eyes vanished as Mithur collapsed backward, leaning against the wall before sliding to the ground. At noon on the 1st of February 1350, Worm-Tongue Mithur was hunted. Klein glanced around at the chaotic bar and closed the door to the basement. He chained the door with the existing chains and forcibly made a knot. He bent down and dragged Mithur King down a few steps, but he didn't directly enter. As he was wary of enemies who might suddenly charge out from inside, he opened up his palm and aimed it at Worm-Tongue Mithur's corpse from above. He had no qualms about grazing the Black Death's third mate. He believed that he was definitely someone with heinous crimes to his name. Firstly, he was once a subordinate of Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, and the deceased pirate admiral had once massacred an entire ship. He was a rather cold-blooded person. It was simply obvious from what the red glove nightmare inside Creeping Hunger had encountered. Secondly, Mithur was working for Vice Admiral Ailment, which was equivalent to working for the Demonist sect. It was unknown how many cases of human trafficking he had been involved in. Creeping Hunger restored its thin human skin appearance as his palm cracked open, producing two bloodshot eyes. In an instant, a biting cold wind stirred in the entrance's passageway to the basement. It constantly spun around Worm-Tongue Mithur's corpse, slowly outlining a blurry figure with short eyebrows and deep eye sockets. Black but undull points of light rapidly surged out of the corpse, combining with Mithur's spirit body. All of them were injected into Creeping Hunger, where an empty finger was waiting for it, forming a connection with the surroundings to a certain degree. Creeping Hunger first went from a black color with a sinister and noble vibe before returning to its original state as it suffused its desire for flesh and blood. Klein silently diverted his senses to it for a few seconds and was pleasantly surprised that the powers he received were rather useful. Although there were only two, they were much better than the previous three he had obtained from the zombie sequence. At this point, he learned that the mid-sequence Beyonder was a Sequence 6 Baron of Corruption from the Lawyer pathway. One of them came from a Baron of Corruption and the other came from the Sequence 7 Briber. The former was distortion. By distorting the target's words, actions, and intent, he could formulate a certain order that provided himself with an advantage, so as to achieve the goal of restraining and influencing his opponent. The latter was bribe, which was one of the various powers of a briber. More accurately, it would be bribe, weaken. The premise behind using this power was to give the target a certain item, then for a certain amount of time, greatly weaken the target's attacks, defense, and control over him. Give the target a certain item? His act of throwing a cup of alcohol was considered a bribe? As expected of the Black Emperor pathway. It finds loopholes in order, while it appears domineering. It's no wonder my dragon's might and psychic piercing powers weren't as effective as I imagined them to be on Mithur. Even my bullet's strength was reduced. I thought that shot would have blown his entire head up. Klein came to a realization. At the same time, he understood why he had involuntarily flown towards the Black Emperor where King of the Five Seas, Nast, was. It was because Nast had distorted his intent to proceed forward, making it impossible for him to stop. Not bad at all. Klein lowered his head to steal a glance at Wormtongue Mither's corpse before he went down to the basement. He was trying to find some food for Creeping Hunger. It was unknown whether it had to do with him throwing Creeping Hunger above the gray fog repeatedly, but Creeping Hunger wasn't as crazy anymore. It seemed to be able to bear with its hunger, therefore, Klein wasn't in a hurry. He slowly proceeded forward so as to be careful of encountering any accidents. Before long, he saw Strongman Oziel leading his subordinates over. There were Beyonders and gunmen, and their numbers were sizable. Klein's expression remained stoic as his black glove was covered in dark golden scales once again. His irises turned light in color as they suddenly turned vertical. Invisible waves instantly surged forward. Psychiatrist Dragon's Might. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.